Little ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out. Kind of.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
I saw two Glens for a moment.
I doubled up. My computer was freaking out about it though. It was like cloning me was not a good plan. I forgot to hook up the dial.
Well, you take a lot of
Happens
space,
every time.
so two of you.
Exactly. Probably filled the hard drive straight away. But we got lots of stuff for you this week. So all kinds of, I guess, kind of around the way. Like we got a bunch of different things. So some things to jump into for instruments, some things to jump into for some different styles of things that we haven't really dealt with a lot.
Oh yeah,
Bunch of
and
different
you know
stuff.
the beauty of searching for these things is just like last week, we found a bunch of new YouTubers that have awesome channels. So there's a lot of freshies tonight too.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Some good stuff coming up. Not sure even where we want to dive in. We've got so many to get to.
Well, we've got
So many different places we could start.
we've got a whole slew of videos on microtones and microtonal instruments, the history of microtonal. One of the channels that, hey, classical nerd, I was intrigued
There you go.
right from the start. But
Nice.
he's going to give us an introduction into what microtonal music is, and Samurai Guitars is going to show us a guitar that has twice as many frets.
Mm-hmm.
And
almost a sitar.
And this channel, this guy, you want to talk about great documentary approach to the history of music? We're going to be looking at his video on the lost art of Western music and microtones. This goes back to where it started, and he has a whole slew of videos about the history of music.
Nice. And those are new to me. So
Oh yeah, they were all new to me. And then of course, Rick Beato. I had to get the counter argument to the microtones, and he's like, check out Polychromatics. So we're gonna have to see what his opinion is on that.
Nice.
And this is another channel that Dolo Muse. She is a polychromatic musician, and I mean, look at her setup. wait till
Wow.
you hear what she does.
Nice.
And you remember Mateus a couple of weeks ago? We
I
were
do.
looking at him. He gives great reviews, and he went to Superbooth 2023 last week, and he's going to show us some of the toys that he ran across and played with.
Very cool.
And Audio University, another new one
Yes,
that
indeed.
I came across. And we're constantly talking about this stuff, in the back, and how you're plugging in, what's the best plugs to use. And this is one of those subjects that if you can use a better cable, you should. and he's going to
Mhm.
show you
Exactly.
why.
Yep. It's important. One of the over things that a lot of people overlook, a matter of
Yeah,
fact.
yeah. And also I get a lot of questions on gain staging, and
Hmm.
I actually had to pick two from him because he's
Hmm.
that good.
Nice.
And this one intrigued me. Have you ever heard of negative harmony?
Yep. From Collier,
I
actually.
hadn't. So I was like, okay, what is this?
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's definitely an interesting concept. And anything from Jacob Collier is definitely worth checking out. Some of it goes, it goes a little bit deep, goes over people's heads, but a lot of it can also be very relatable, which is very cool.
well, and it kind of plays in with different approaches to music. Since we're
Hmm.
going to be looking at microtones and things like that, I thought this was another interesting approach to harmony.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and Tatro going to show us the
Hmm.
best live looping MIDI controller setup, which is another
Nah.
one that I get a lot of people who ask like, what's the best looper? What's the best to take out on the road and be able
Hmm.
to do everything that a musician wants to do in a nice small package. Wait till
Hmm.
you see what he's got for a setup there. Oh,
The gear.
Jake
Back to
Jake
Jake.
Lizio, you can't ignore him. And as I
That's right.
was looking at all these different ones, modulation, this is something that I'm constantly trying to
Mhm.
learn more about. And how to shift keys is
Yeah.
something that it's the key to writing great music.
One of the big things about it, in fact, is that if you have something that's just a very simple chord progression and you really like it and you like what what it sounds like, what it comes together as, but sometimes somebody will just say, "Oh, what you got there is a chorus, but it's not a whole song." And like to you, it's a whole song, but it's just this one thing that's going around. And modulation is a great way to be able to use something like that and make it more interesting, make it more, fertile ground for doing other things because you started in one key that's very simple and then you shift and just by modulating you can make it sound more
Yeah,
interesting than it is
hopefully it
technically.
helps you to think about ways to modulate your parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, the best way to learn scale or mode first.
Hmm. There you go. This is what I was talking about where it looks like the fingertips are like dipped in ink as far as showing you which finger he's hitting at which time, so like that he's hitting you know that blue one that's over there, that he's hitting that one with the middle finger or from the pinky if whichever one's blue I can't see from this
Yeah,
far.
and we've looked at POW Music before. I love the way he does his
Yep.
tab. It's very intuitive.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you want to improve your arpeggios? We'll show you a full workout. Robbie
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Barnby.
Yep. And that was new for me this week as well.
A couple of guitar ones in here.
Mm-hmm.
And finger
Finger
style
style guitar.
guitar, that's the one that I'd like to learn.
Mm-hmm. And that one's got about, I think, was it 10 patterns to go with, and that's where some will be easier than others, but just getting a hold of any of them will kind of get you introduced to that style, get that sound in your ear, so that helps a lot as
And
well.
like he says, anyone can play guitar.
Yeah, exactly. Just like it says.
Oh, and Scott's bass lesson for all you bassists out there, the
Hmm.
ultimate YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it,
Well worth
and
the
an
time.
interesting approach to bass lessons from a drummer, because the
Hmm.
relationship between a bassist and a drummer is a tight one.
Exactly. Very important.
So,
We have quite a long list of things to get to tonight. Hope we have time for it all. If we don't, I'm sure we'll be back another week to do more and cover all these topics in further depth.
oh yeah, so
But good to get some coverage all
some of
around.
these eventually lead to the topic next week. It's kind of how we got
Exactly.
here. We've been looking at all these cool instruments the last couple of weeks, and a lot of them, are microtonal MIDI instruments. These new MPE MIDI instruments kind of get past, our normal tone system, and
Hmm.
I've been fascinated at what's possible when you start to play the notes between the notes.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of times, having played fretless bass for a while, it was interesting that if I were playing, one epiphany I had is I'm sitting there playing along to songs on the radio, or just songs that came up on whatever I was listening to, and by going from one to the other, the tuning had changed. So it went from something that was probably 440 to something that was probably 432 or whatever. And just being able to still play without having to retune the instrument was just a huge benefit. I didn't, as long as you don't use the open strings on a fretless, it's just, you can just play anywhere and you're fine. So it was kind of one of those moments where I was like, oh, on a fretless bass, you could do any of that stuff. You could do any of the microtonal things, but it's just, you're not precise on where they are, but you would have to be precise on where you land with your fingers to get those sounds exactly.
So fretless bass would be a good introduction for a bassist to a microtonal environment then.
Probably. We'll see how they say with the number of frets and how much, because basically you're doing things a lot closer together. So like if you're used to doing, 3 notes that are a good stretch where you're going 1, 1, 3, 5, let's say, for the frets. If you had double the frets in there, that's 10 frets now. So maybe, that's 1, 5, 10 for the frets that you're hitting, but it's just a visual thing. You're still hitting the same place, but you're looking at it and you're going further in terms of how many frets it looks like. Whereas on the fretless bass, you'd hear the note that you're playing at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And as long as you're matching what you're hearing, then you're hitting it in the right spot, but there's no marker for it. Like you might be right between the markers on, the dots that you see on the top of the neck, because on the top of the neck, sometimes they have the dots there to give you a reference of where you should be.
Now, one of the videos we're going to be looking at as we go along, he plays a microtonal guitar, which has tiny little frets.
Exactly. Yeah. There were others that we saw that had kind of squiggly frets. Those were, I believe it was just intonation, or just a different overall tuning to what we normally would see on the guitars. I'll get a video about that for maybe next time, now that we've breached the subject, and look at it one this week. We'll see about maybe seeing something similar but different next time.
Well, and we've got a guitarist in the house, hey, RJS.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
You're gonna like some
Always
of these.
a pleasure. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
which one do you want to start to
well,
dive
I
in
think
with?
this is a good one. The introduction into microtonal, so that we can get a better understanding of what they are and how they play into things. Plus, he's a classical nerd, so I'm excited to
That's
see.
a win.
I am going back to this channel, especially to get ready for classical night. He's got he's got a bunch of good stuff. He's at Classical Nerd over on YouTube.
Right.
And this is an introduction into microtones.
Music uses a chromatic scale of 12 different tones to the octave. But what if it didn't? I'm the Classical Nerd, and today we're talking about microtonal music. Microtones are, by many commonly used definitions, any note that falls between the keys, so to speak, of a traditional keyboard layout. But this is actually rather narrow-minded. In fact, there are many systems of microtones, and trying to apply it to a keyboard sometimes isn't the best way to go about analyzing them. Musical pitches are registered in hertz. Doubling the hertz means that your pitch is going to go up 1 octave. For judging smaller musical distances, there is such a thing as the synth. Theorists and acousticians use this in order to differentiate between 2 notes. And the cent is very useful in this, because 100 cents equals 2 adjacent notes on a piano keyboard. Hertz are way too wide to really be used when talking about microtones, so the cent is really all that we're going to be using. So with 100 cents between notes and 12 notes, this gives us 1200 cents to the octave, which is plenty to work with. On the keyboard, you can split this into 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 equal parts. Splitting it any other way gives you some kind of microtone. Mathematically speaking, you could even have a scale with 1200 notes to the octave, 1 note per cent going up. But the problem is that you reach a point of indistinguishability well before this point. You see, variations in mere cents are impossible for our ears to discern, and this is actually what makes orchestral string sections or choirs sound so rich. There is microtonal fluctuation at the cent level. We can't perceive it actively, but it makes them sound very, very rich and very, very full. As one might imagine, there are some microtonal scales that are more common than others. And generally, since they repeat every octave, we refer to them by how many pitches there are per octave. And generally speaking, the scales that we use, the notes are equally spaced apart from one another. And so they're referred to as tuned in equal temperament. So for example, the chromatic scale is 12 TET, 12 tone equal temperament, whereas the quarter tone scale, 24 notes per octave, twice the number of our usual 12, is also called 24 TET. 72 TET has, you guessed it, 72 notes per octave. If the number is divisible by 12, it makes it rather easy to map to our keyboard, and makes it a little bit easier to notate using our traditional 5-line notation that was made for the 12-tone system. So 24 TET is referred to as the quarter tone scale because its smallest step is half of a half step, or a quarter step, and thus a quarter tone. 72 TET is called the 12th tone scale, because each step is 1/12 of a whole step. For all practical purposes, the 12th tone scale is the smallest practical microtonal scale. It's very hard for our ears to distinguish between successive steps, because they're a little over 16 cents apart. Western composers are only relatively recently making use of these novel scales, within the past 100 years or so notation still really isn't standardized. In fact, the only microtonal system of notation that has become anything close to a standard is quarter tones. And even then, some composers still opt for their own systems of notation. It's why any piece containing microtones should have a preamble explaining the use of the symbols. Quarter tones have become common enough in contemporary music that the 4 new accidentals you have to use in this system have become pretty much standardized. They are the quarter step sharp, the 3/4 step sharp, the quarter step flat, and the 3/4 step flat. But some composers have opted for notations that look like this, or this, or this. Quarter tones have an eerie and unstable feeling about them, and the fact that they're pretty easy to integrate into traditional notation means that they've been a pretty popular system. Charles Ives wrote 3 innovative quarter tone pieces for 2 pianos, while in Europe, Alois Haba and Ivan Vishnegradsky were experimenting with all sorts of microtonal systems, from quarter tones all the way up to 12th tones. Haba wrote string quartets in 6th tones, while Vishnegradsky wrote a piece for 6 pianos, 5 of which are detuned in 12th tones. Around the same time, Mexican composer Julian Carrillo based his entire musical philosophy on notes that reside outside of the standard 12, in a theory he dubbed the 13th sound. And microtones may be odd to Western ears, but they're an integral part of music from other cultures. Arabic music makes use of what we would call the quarter tone, as did the ancient Greek modes, of which there were thousands, one for each piece practically. They're used pretty freely in Balinese gamelan music, and are even used in the blues in order to denote expressiveness. Other times microtones are used to tune instruments to pure harmonics instead of the slightly detuned system that we have that makes up the 12 notes. In fact, the 11th harmonic is pretty much exactly F half sharp. But what if you're splitting the octave into ways that aren't divisible by 12? All of a sudden, you can't really notate it. I mean, sure, you can split the octave into 11 or 13 ways, but trying to notate this on a system designed for 12 notes can barely handle quarter tones. Composer and microtonal theorist Easley Blackwood, who wrote a collection of electronic microtonal etudes, used a legend at the beginning of the scores to map out how he was going to apply undivisible by 12 divisions of the octave to a 12-note friendly system. The eerie 13 TET in Blackwood's hands looks a bit like this. These are traditional 12-note accidentals, but they cannot be read as if applying to 12 notes per octave. This is perhaps the only way to fuse unusual systems of tuning into traditional 5-line notation. Finally, as if this wasn't already enough, some novel scales have been formed by splitting intervals other than the octave. The Bolin-Pierce scale, for instance, splits the 3-to-1 ratio, which is the octave and the fifth, and this system is known as the tritave. Collectively, any scale that does this is known as a non-octave repeating scale. You'd think they would have found a cooler name for it, but apparently they haven't. In total, although microtones have been used for millennia across the world, and in Western music for over 100 years, there is still so much more to be appreciated and to be explored.
newer systems.
That's our classical nerd.
Hmm. Nice. Very
What
cool.
did he call that? The non-octave.
What, it was going a scale and a half? Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Non-octave
it was
scales,
basic.
non-octave systems.
It was playing what the 11th. It went from F to G on the octave.
He was actually saying in that one was going to consider an octave instead of from C to C, consider an octave from C to G. So you're going an octave and a half technically in our system and calling that an octave. So that's where he was getting the non-octave setup. He's doing an octave and a half and considering that to be an octave in there. But then you have to try to notate it where you're notating an octave and a half per octave. In a way, it's kind of like doing a song in 6/4 time or in 12/8 time or whatever, where you're doing it in a timing that is like 1.5 times longer, where it'll come back around after 1.5 times, as opposed to or coming back around after 2 times instead of coming back every time like an octave would.
And we're dealing with like quarter sharps and flats, half sharps and flats.
Getting messy, yeah.
Well, you can see how that could get messy when you're notating.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing is like a C 1/4 sharp is the same as a D 3/4 flat, right? So the 1/4 sharp and the 1/4 flat and the 3/4 sharp and the 3/4 flat, they correspond to each other because we're just basically putting one in between each, but we're just saying it's either going to be basically half of a C sharp or half or half of a D flat, halfway in between.
And that could definitely introduce some interesting songwriting.
Yeah, and that's actually where you can get those. Like they mentioned the Arabic scale and how you can get things that are in that kind of a scale that uses 24 steps. You can get all of those kinds of sounds. Now they don't necessarily use all 24 all the time. Like it's not like on a piano where you just do a run, you run all the way up all 12. We usually a lot of times we just do 8. Like that was just the diatonic scale, so that's just C major or A minor going up all the white notes. But if you do all 12, you'd be going up, chromatic scale, which we're going to get into later with the Polychromatics. But the individual chromatic scale would just be going up every note. And then we're saying if we put one in between every one of those, then we're getting to where we have those 24 per. But again, on a fret list, you get more than just those 24. You get every division you could possibly find just by moving a little bit further down or a little bit further up. So that's where you have more freedom on a fret list, whereas with the frets are what lock you into those particular steps. And then you can use the bends if you want to get to partway in between. And that's where you can do you can get all of those tones on a regular guitar, for example, if you just bend halfway to those tones.
Well, and just like with the normal keyboard, you get locked in.
Yep. But again, you can also use your mod wheel where you could tell your mod wheel instead of being, 12 tones or, a whole tone, you could probably set the mod wheel to be very low, maybe only a semitone or a whole tone, and then just go up that little bit. So you could use that to get to where you're going. So you could hit, that F half sharp, you just go like a little bit on that push. Like mine is either I have a binary button where it's either I'm bending or I'm not. But it's not just like the little wheel like you usually have where you can just bend up that little bit and then come back.
Yeah, and with some of those MPE keyboards we've been seeing, you can slide up and down the key and get that effect.
Or aftertouch. You could hit the button and then the harder you push after, you could make that do the bend for you. A lot of different options that are cool with those controllers. Classical nerd. Very cool.
Now, when I was looking through these microtonals and seeing like what different types of instruments, I mean, I've seen keyboards that can do it. Guitars intrigue me. Like you've mentioned, like a fretless bass can
Yep.
be like that. Well, this guy has a guitar that actually does have the frets, but it's designed for microtonal play.
Right.
And he has a series of the world's weirdest guitars, which we will probably be looking more at that series because we're always interested in weird instruments.
Oh yeah. And also why they are weird or what makes them weird or all of that. That's all very interesting to me because everybody, thousands of millions of people have guitars, but not many people have these strange guitars. And the question is, why is this one different, and what can you do on this one that you can't do on a regular?
Yeah, and I'm always curious as to why some of these don't get picked up more by musicians. The weird ones, there's always a reason why some instruments don't get popular, whether it's
Mhm.
they're difficult or usually that's the main reason. If it's a hard
Mhm.
instrument to actually pick up on, that tends to get in the way.
There's also if it's a hard instrument to carry to class when you're a little kid, like tuba. There's not a lot of tuba or accordion players necessarily because they don't necessarily want to carry all that back and forth. But besides concerns like
Yeah, you got to be a strong boy to play a tuba.
that, it's not a tuba.
So this is a samurai guitarist over at YouTube, and he's going to show us why does this guitar have so many frets? The world's weirdest guitar, number 6.
I love it.
Everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the world's weirdest guitars. Today we're getting into some microtonal madness with a guitar that would otherwise be completely normal if it didn't have 11 additional frets slapped onto the neck. I've never seen anything like this before. This should be a good. Before we get into it, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, my course platform, Samurai Guitar Theory. Over there, I've made 2 courses, The Rudiments and Beyond the Basics, where I walk you through the building blocks of music theory from the ground up to more advanced topics. These 2 courses are professionally animated, making the tough stuff easy to understand. There are interactive elements like detailed documentation, quizzes, lists of things to work on, and more. I'm doing a flash sale over there where the first 100 of you to use promo code Microtonal will save $50 off the 2-course bundle, getting you both courses for the normal price of one. You can find that over at www.samuraiguitartheory.com. I'll also put up a link in the description. Anyways, on to the madness. Today's guitar is the High Flyer Phase 4 MT by Eastwood Guitars. This is a standard guitar with a standard sized neck. However, there is one unique feature that takes it into the world of what the heck. There are more frets. A lot more frets. This allows you to play notes that would be inaccessible on a normal guitar. For example, here's an A, here's an A flat, and here's a note that's halfway between an A and an A flat. What can you do with this newfound freedom? Here's a little demo. Now, let me tell you about my relationship with microtonal music. Prior to getting this guitar, there was none. I figured I could go on the Wikipedia page, get a feel for all things microtonal, sum it up in this video, and move on with my life. I was wrong. The wormhole that is microtonality goes far deeper than I could have imagined. This video should not be seen as a comprehensive source on the subject, but rather one man's experience as he peers into the quarter-tone looking glass. First of all, what even is microtonality? To understand that, we need to talk about the tuning system that Western music uses, 12-tone equal temperament or 12-tet. When I hit the low E string on my Telecaster, it vibrates at a frequency that we've labeled an E note. If I play the 12th fret on my low E string, my string vibrates at twice the rate. This note is also called an E, and the musical space between these 2 E's is called an octave. 12-tone equal temperament breaks this octave down into 12 equal spaces or 12 tones. The system is reflected by the guitar as it has 12 notes separated by 12 frets on every string before the octave repeats. The space from one of these notes to the next is called a semitone. Going up 2 notes gives us a whole tone. It's this system of spacings or intervals that makes up the framework for the bulk of music we come across. Which brings me to microtonality, music that is created using spaces smaller than the semitone. When we look at this guitar, we can see that in the space that there would normally be 12 frets, there are actually 18, giving us 6 additional notes we can play. This naturally raises the question, why? Well, like I mentioned before, the music that's been classified as Western music uses the 12-tone equal temperament tuning system. But there are other musics from around the globe that use completely different systems. You can find music from Africa, India, Thailand, Burma, as well as many other places that use notes outside of the tuning system that we've become accustomed to. With a standard guitar, you could only play these notes with a slide or by bending to them, which offers a decreased accessibility. Something like this would be near impossible to play. The next question that comes up is why don't all guitars have these extra frets? Well, since the bulk of the music that we're exposed to doesn't use these notes, they can often sound quite out of tune or just straight up wrong. For example, here is the worst sounding chord that I've ever played. Now, just because 12-tet is the standard doesn't mean that there aren't bands who have tapped into something outside of the norm. One of those bands is called King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, who I am ashamed to admit I just found out about a few weeks ago. They're a rock group who've used customized instruments allowing them to access twice as many notes in a 24-tet system. The guitarist and bassist use instruments with added frets, the keyboardist uses a modified synth, and the drummer, he just plays the drums. This guitar was directly inspired by the band as it's essentially a recreation of the Univox High Flyer that their guitarist Cook Craig uses. If you've never heard those guys, definitely check them out. I can't recommend them enough. My relationship with this guitar has been much different than any other guitar I've owned. When I got it, I plugged it in, played for a bit, and said to myself, I have no idea how I'm going to make anything half decent on this thing. This video is going to be a disaster. But I stuck with it and started to figure out how someone like myself, who has spent a lifetime deep in the 12-tet system, might begin dabbling with microtonality. When I'm playing this thing, I don't like to draw too much attention to those microtonal notes or it sounds quite wrong to my ear. Instead, I think of them as passing tones in chords or lines like this. It's important to note that even though we use a 12-tet system, that doesn't mean that we never come across these microtonal notes. The blues is filled with quarter tone bends that sound amazing, and whenever a guitarist uses vibrato, they're bending their string in and around these microtones. When I realized this, I tried playing some cliched blues dad guitar store licks, and that really opened a lot of what I personally can do with this. And that brings me to the part in the video where I give you the official Sammy G review on this guitar. Part of me wishes that they just straight up split every fret into two, but my understanding is that Stu McKenzie of King Gizzard based his original microtonal guitar off of a Turkish Beg Lama, which uses a similar layout. The other guitarists in the band used the same system, and then Eastwood used that for what I'm pretty sure is the first mass-produced microtonal guitar. I have mixed feelings on this. There are times when I'm playing this guitar and I want to grab a note that's not there, like the quarter tone that would be here. However, since not every fret is split, I can still conceptualize this like a normal guitar. I have seen pictures of guitars that have 24 frets in the octave, and it's totally overwhelming. The guitar sells for $1,200 US, which is a lot for a guitar made overseas. The quality is acceptable, but that wouldn't be the selling point at this price range. My biggest complaint is that Eastwood doesn't also make a microtonal bass, because if everyone in your band isn't using this system, you're limited in the ways that you can incorporate this guitar. To summarize, like every guitar I've ever featured in this series, it's certainly not for everyone, but after I got over my initial learning curve, I found myself thinking in ways that I've never thought before, which is one of my favorite musical experiences. Of all my weird guitars, this one challenged me the most, but it was a challenge that I ended up thoroughly enjoying, and I can see myself continuing to dabble with this in the future. To wrap it up, here's a jam that I think encapsulates what I can do best on this guitar. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, the Eastwood High Flyer Phase 4 MT. an adventure into microtonality. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video. Over the last couple months, a lot of the revenue sources on YouTube got pandemicked pretty hard, so make sure you check them out over at www.samuraiguitartheory.com, and by them, I mean me. I made these courses on music theory thinking about how a guitar player could learn this stuff from the ground up. I wanted to make the resource I wish I had when I was learning diatonic harmony, triads, the way that scales work, modes, extended chords, and stuff like that. Make sure that you're one of the first 100 to use promo code Microtonal so you can get both courses bundled together for the normal price of one. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and leave me a comment. If you want to get caught up in the series where I check out the world's weirdest guitars, hit that link up there. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe. Until next time, I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'll see you again soon.
Oh, Samurai is cool.
And that's the way you do a microtonal jam. Now, one suggestion I did have, or one thought I had, as far as the he did mention that it would be overwhelming to have all 24 frets there, and that the system they were using didn't need it and all that. My thought was, what about, or that it would be better if he could get to the ones that he couldn't get to on there, have them all there, but have every other one be like a clear fret. So it's there, but you don't see it. Like when you're looking at the neck, it looks like a regular 12 fret guitar. So you see the landmarks of where everything is.
That would be a good approach.
The ones in between are like, not glass, but you know what I mean? Just a different, you don't see them, so they're not as visible. So you can still landmark everything where it is. It's not as overwhelming. So you can get all your regular chord shapes and all, but all those extra tones are available. Just a thought.
And it doesn't seem like he had too tough of a time assimilating to it.
Yeah. Very cool. I do like seeing people trying, new things on a new instrument that they haven't had for long, just to, because it is a fun exploration and seeing where they go with it. Just like we saw some of the different videos for, I think it was the Harpeggi, and seeing that in different cases they were using it different ways. Like in one case they had a group of people all using a different section of the instrument and things like that. And
look, Samurai, I subscribed and I liked the video.
See, look at that.
Good channel.
Just like
good channel.
Yeah, very.
It's got some good stuff.
And very cool jam. And again, especially for not having an instrument like that for long, and for not having much exposure to the microtonal before that. And I can see that being a big rabbit hole. Like you go down there and you just find this whole new world that you didn't even know was there, because we don't run into it in our daily lives in the Western world.
And he does go after some weird instruments, not just guitars.
Yep. That looks like a whole big fretboard right there.
Yeah, we will be checking out more of him in the future.
Absolutely.
At Samurai Guitarist on YouTube.
Most appreciated.
So as we're exploring this microtonal information, it's good to know where this stuff started from, because this is not new. I mean, this goes back quite a ways. And, they mention certain parts of the world where this is more used, and Faraji. I need Ange for these names. This guy makes musical documentaries that are just fantastic. When I was looking for this, it's a little longer than our normal videos, but super informative. I mean, this is a history lesson on where this musical technique started from.
It's gonna be cool. Nice.
And we can find him over on YouTube. I am definitely going through his whole series. He's like me, he wants to know the history of music, and I mean, he goes all over the place. Ooh, the French Renaissance song. But you can find him at Faraji at YouTube. And if you're like me and you like the history of music, you should.
Definitely. Got to subscribe and get in there.
Oh, and this one's from our front cloud. We have to bring him up to the front.
There you go. You've been called to the principal's office. But we have
What if I told you
to make that happen?
that Western music does not use all the notes that exist. If you've grown up listening only to Western music, you've been hearing only a limited selection of all the notes that are out there. What if I told you now that the predecessors of Western civilization used to have these notes beyond A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Si, Do? This is the story of microtonality. This is the story of the lost notes of Western music. Now, what is microtonality to begin with? I'm going to keep it very simple, and again, I have to stress this at the beginning of every video because there's always some people who are musicologically inclined who see some of my videos and they say, oh, it was too basic and simple and generalistic. Yes, these videos are meant for history buffs, people interested in culture generally. I don't want this to be sort of an ivory tower thing where I only speak to the worthy who already know music theory. My point with these videos is that if you're just generally interested in history, and you want to know a bit more about the history of music, and you know nothing about music theory, then you can follow these videos. So, to keep the concept of microtonality very simple, the best way to understand it is to understand the concept of distance measurement in music. We can measure distance in music the same way that we can measure distance in physical space. For physical space, you have the meter, the centimeter, the millimeter, etc., or the foot, the inch, whatever. With music, it works like this. You look at a keyboard. An interval is a unit of musical distance. So the interval between two adjacent white keys, one whole tone. And the interval between a white key and an adjacent black key is an interval of a semitone, smaller than an entire tone. And this is where it ends for Western music. Western music does not subdivide pitch beyond the limit of the semitone. It does not go into smaller intervals. And whenever you get into smaller intervals than the semitone, you are effectively dealing with microtonality. Microtonality is any pitch, any note found in between the space between white and black keys. Anything, any subdivision of pitch smaller than the semitone gives you microtonality. Now, not all cultures are like the European musical culture. Namely, the Indian and Middle Eastern cultures, they're the ones that have been cultivating microtonality as a basic aspect of melody for the better part of at least 1,400 years, as far as we know, since the Middle Ages, basically. We can say with utter confidence. I'm Iranian myself. I write microtonal melodies all the time. Now, what does a microtonal melody actually sound like? Because I can be talking about it, but giving an actual example would probably be more eloquent. So let me fetch... Oh my god! I have loaded the song All Star, the Shrek song, into this program. So we're going to listen to it with the standard Western tuning that it usually uses. Alright, so the version that we're used to obviously is diatonic. All the intervals are either whole tones or semitones at most. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to retune this into a Rast-like scale. So we have Rast Panjga in Iranian music, which is kind of like major but with microtonality. So I can take this and I'm going to detune it by 50 cents, which will make it enter the microtonal zone. So I can go, I'll take this. So that's what microtonality sounds like. One thing that I have to stress is that microtonality, you know, if you're not used to it, if you haven't grown up in a culture that uses it, it's going to sound very off-putting and bad to you the first time you hear it. It's sort of like, you know, the first time that somebody drinks coffee. I don't think any of us have ever enjoyed our first vodka shooter or our first coffee the first time we ever tasted it. It's a bit of an acquired taste, but myself having grown up in a microtonal musical culture, I can assure you that it's completely normal once you're used to it, and especially if you're used to it since birth. Then it's not at all unusual, and it sounds very musical to the ears that are used to it. Now, what does this have to do with the West? Because okay, Indians and Middle Easterners have it. How does this tie back to Western music? Well, Middle Eastern music and European music are connected to one another. They are two sides of the same coin. They have common roots historically, and you could say that they're basically two diverging versions of what was initially largely the same musical tradition. Now, the common root lies in the Greco-Roman period. Both traditions stretch back fundamentally to the codification and the systematization of music theory that was started, really we can be certain, in the Hellenistic Greek era, and then sort of, took form in the Greco-Roman period. One of those musical innovations from the Hellenistic era, and probably before that, was microtonality. So microtonality was very much an aspect of ancient Greek music. It was found in the enharmonic genus. The Greeks had three types of melody, three genera: the diatonic genus, the enharmonic genus, the chromatic genus. And the enharmonic genus was the one that was defined by the usage of microtonal intervals. So we've established that ancient Greeks had microtonality. So what happened? Because we were talking about the genus, the genera, right? The diatonic genera is what we call Western melodies today. We've been using the same diatonic modes ever since ancient Greece. That's what, we know that in the Middle Ages they say we are using the ancient Greek modes. Now the enharmonic stopped being used, the chromatic stopped being used, but the diatonic survived. So if the diatonic survived, why not the enharmonic? What happened? I propose to you that we go back in time and put on our Belgian glasses and Hercule Poirot this shit. Aristoxenos, renowned theoretician and musician from the Hellenistic era, tells us in his own words, "Our contemporaries have entirely deprecated the most beautiful of the genera, that which was most appreciated by the ancients because of its dignity, so that the majority has no longer the slightest apprehension of the enharmonic intervals." Stefan Hagel, the one who wrote this book, which has these quotations, says, Aristoxenos is actually opposing a majority who are by no means ready to accept his preferred enharmonic even as a theoretical possibility. Around 300 BC, Aristoxenos was facing a world in which not even the trained ears of professional musicians welcomed the true quarter tone as a possible melodic interval. The majority, and it would seem the vast majority of theorizing musicians, considered a harmonic theory based on melodic quarter tones as ridiculous. And here it says that effeminate louts would vomit bile when they heard the true enharmonic music, as Aristoxenos expressed with his usual charm. I love it's fucking drama going on in ancient Greece. People goddamn roasting each other like, hey, you don't like enharmonic music, you're stupid malaka, you're stupid bitch. Merde. And the Roman imperial period seems to see the heyday of the chromatic modes. The chromatic modes sound very jazzy and bluesy to our ears, and some of their intervals are also very typically Middle Eastern sounding to our modern ears. They will be picked up by the Eastern neighbors of the Greeks. For example, Kurt Sachs describes how the Arabs adopted the chromatic modes to come up with the Hijaz family of makams in modern Arabic music. However, the chromatic will also slowly decline during the Roman imperial period, and as the curtains close on antiquity and open on the Middle Ages, now only the diatonic remains, and the diatonic genus is the one that sounds characteristically Western. However, the disappearance of enharmonic in the Hellenistic era does not mark the final death of microtonality on European soil. Microtonality will very much continue to exist and even thrive in Europe during the entirety of the Middle Ages. As a melodic framework, microtonalities disappeared, so no more did Greco-Roman composers and later European composers of the Middle Ages write down melodies where entire notes were microtonal, where pillar notes of the melody were microtonal as an interval. That doesn't happen anymore. What does happen, however, and it's something that I've talked about in my previous video, this one, is that the vocal style of the Middle Ages, unlike the impression that we gain from listening to most recordings of medieval music today, was not sung with the modern conservatory academic Western classical style. So most often when you hear recordings of medieval music, they will use the typically conservative Western type of singing, you know, douce dame jolie pour Dieu, which is this very sort of fixed way of singing. You only sing the diatonic pitches, the diatonic notes, no rapid modulation, no sudden articulation, nothing abrupt. Everything is very sort of smooth and long phrases throughout the Middle Ages. The vocal style resembled something far more like modern Andalusian Spanish singing or Balkanic singing, Middle Eastern singing, and so it may have been something closer to douce dame jolie pour Dieu. The whole point with medieval music practice was that the written down melodies are diatonic, right? The melodic framework is diatonic, purely. However, these diatonic notes are embellished. You're not supposed to sing exactly what's on paper. You have douce dame jolie, a bunch of diatonic notes, but then you ornament and everything, and as you do with Middle Eastern or Romanian or Greek musical practice or Serbian, Andalusian Spanish, whatever, you implement a whole lot of rapid articulation and ornamentation that inflects pitch, that bends the pitch and uses the full spectrum of pitch in between the diatonic notes. The entire spectrum of hue and color. It's kind of like, you know how you have orange and then you have yellow? Well, there's still a whole spectrum in between the two, right? And the whole point of singing in the Middle Eastern style or in the accurate European medieval style is to utilize all those hues in between. A great example to illustrate this would be this passage by the singer Haide, who sings in the Persian classical tradition. Listen to the beginning of the songs. She's singing in a mostly diatonic manner. Now watch out for the moment when she switches into a fully microtonal aesthetic. It's kind of crazy actually, the effect that it does. It's almost like, you know, when Ant-Man in the Marvel movies, he pushes the button and he enters the quantum realm, this alternate universe or whatever that is found in between the atoms. That's really what the microtonal aesthetic is all about. It's about using to its fullest potential the theoretical and artistic expression that lies in between the piano notes. There's this entire universe of sound, this entire treasure trove of musical expression, of theory that is found in the utilization of the entire spectrum of pitch. And unfortunately, as a Middle Eastern musician myself, I every day have to deal in the comments or in real life with Western classical snobs who truly believe that the only sophisticated form of music in the world is the Western European classical tradition, that no other culture has music theory. I've been told that before. You guys don't have music theory, you just have tribal banging on drums. And I've been told so many times, what is sophisticated about Byzantine chants or Middle Eastern music? You're just ululating because you're tribal and you don't know how to sing properly. I've heard that a lot of times, and this is a sort of commentary that has a long history, you know, that goes back to the 18th century or 19th century views that Europeans had of Byzantine chant, belittling it in very rude manners, saying that they're just ululating and just doing ornamentations because they haven't learned how to sing correctly, how to sing like civilized people, because obviously civilized people are, if you sing like a Western European, you're civilized. And what they're missing is this tribalistic ululation that is primitive, is actually an incredibly complex form of technique that is meant to highlight the full breadth of pitch that exists in the entire spectrum of pitch in between the diatonic notes. This is an art form that has been built over centuries and centuries and centuries of music theory, started by the likes of Pythagoras, who were the first to really go into microtonality and try to understand it. So yeah, just having to hear all the time that, you know, Middle Eastern music and Byzantine chant are primitive is unfortunately, it still goes on today, even in the comments of my videos, because they don't actually understand what is going on. They just hear random ululations and vibrato, and they don't understand, you know, the actual underlying music theory behind it. I would call that Eurocentric, but this does disservice to many Europeans, such as the Bulgarians, the Serbs, the Corsicans, the Sardinians. So it's really Western European centric, and it's just a bunch of stuff. It's not the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people, fortunately, are much more open-minded than this. So microtonality very much persists on European soil long after the disappearance of the enharmonic genus. Melodies are not built with microtonality anymore. They're built only with diatonic intervals, but those diatonic intervals are dressed up, ornamented, embellished with microtonal inflection. No, the final death of microtonality occurs starting from the Renaissance onwards. Starting from the Renaissance, Western European music becomes obsessed with the concept of harmony, and that becomes the primary pursuit of musical exploration in Western Europe. Harmony is when you have two or more notes that are not the same note and you sound them at the same time. And the resulting, acoustic effect of having two or more pitches that are not the same sounded at the same time, that's harmony. So if you press three different keys on a piano that are not the same key, that are not the same note, then you're hearing harmony. That's all it is. And Western European music, starting from the Renaissance, becomes primarily vertical in nature. Vertical in the sense that in order to produce harmony, you have to have different notes sounded at the same time. And so you get the full-blown exploration of polyphony, starting from the, 14th to sort of 18th century. That's really sort of the heyday of European polyphony, where you have these extremely sophisticated and complex pieces where you have literally 6 different songs basically happening at the same time. And they're all meant to highlight the harmonic relationship, to highlight the acoustic effect of having what happens if this note, and this note are sounded at the same time. The problem with that is, once you want to start highlighting harmonic relationships between notes that are not the same, well, these notes then have to be as clear as possible, right? If you want to have these 3 notes sounding very clearly and really highlight the effect of these 3 notes, well, these 3 notes have to be solid and fixed. Everybody can't be doing at the same time, because then the pitch is not fixed. The pitch is always wavering, and there's really never a moment where the harmonic relationship is clearly expressed. Of course, you can have harmony with that type of ornamented melismatic singing. Certainly they did that in the Middle Ages, but it doesn't give you the polyphony, it doesn't give you the clear harmony that music in Western Europe from the Renaissance onwards was obsessed with having. And so what starts to happen is that in order to complexify and secure the vertical integrity of the musical structure, you have to simplify the horizontal complexity. Now everybody can't be going out of the pitches. Now you simplify the melodic lines down to their most basic form. Ha, ha, ha. Fixed, right? And that gives you the clearest possible harmonies. And that really marks the final end of microtonality on European soil. Born out of the Renaissance and the verticality of the 14th to 18th centuries is born the current style of Western music as we know it, which is defined by near exclusive diatonicity. The story that I've been telling here is bigger than just the disappearance of microtonality in Europe. Instead, it's a broader overview of how European music changed from what was initially a melodic tradition where complexity and sophistication lied in the experimentation, the research, the expression of the full breadth and width of the spectrum that lies in between the diatonic notes. You begin with the Greco-Roman tradition where entire melodies are built out of intervals that are not diatonic, intervals that are smaller than the ones we use in modern Western music. And then when the Middle Ages come, you're dealing with a diatonic framework, but within this diatonic framework, it is still expected to use that full spectrum of pitch by bending pitch, by going into the microtonality. And then the Renaissance comes in and European music becomes completely leveled, flattened into the hyper simplicity of complete diatonicism and nothing else. You sing specifically those notes and nothing more than that. You don't bend the pitch, you just stay on this pitch exactly and nothing more. However, this lack of complexity, this leveling of complexity on the melodic level allows for the beginnings of a vertical complexity that is the most complex in all world traditions. No other tradition can come close to the Western Europeans' research and development into vertical complexity, into bass lines, into harmony, into having multiple melodies happening at the same time. Hopefully this video will have given you a broader, more complete perspective on the history of European music when it comes to sophistication and complexity. Unfortunately, very often, music history is taught not by actual music historians, not by musicologists, not by ethnomusicologists. Often it's going to be taught to you on your first piano lesson by your piano teacher who has had only a Western classical training. And they have been taught only to understand specifically the styles of music that are of Mozart's and Beethoven's time, specifically Western European music of a specific date and time. That's a very narrow mindset. There's so much more to music than this, but they've been taught this is musical notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, diatonic intervals, and they haven't even been taught to recognize other pitches than those as functional musical pitches. And so they hear Middle Easterners singing and they say, oh, that sounds bad. Why does it sound bad? Because that doesn't sound like the notes that I'm used to. They haven't even been trained and taught to recognize the complexity that lies in those cultures. They can't even begin to process what's going on. It's that complex, and so they just reject it as, oh, it's primitive, it's simple. And the basic fallacy is their definition of complex is whatever sounds like Mozart. If it doesn't sound like Mozart, then it's not complex. It's a very reductionist and ethnocentric view of music. And so, based on that fallacy that is not analytical, that is not ethnomusicologically informed, they will give you a version of history which is a simple model of simple to complex. European music used to be simple and primitive, and finally standard notation comes. Finally polyphony, finally harmony, finally music is complex. This is one form of complexity among others. And in order to attain this type of complexity, another type of complexity that existed before that had to do with melodic complexity, with pitch, etc., all of that had to be leveled into complete diatonicism, and therefore a less Eurocentric, a more analytical, a more ethnomusicologically informed assessment of European music history is not one of a simplistic, simple to complex model of history. Instead, it's complex to complex. Only one form of complexity was exchanged for another one. So you start with something that sounded like the Islamic call to prayer, which is very much complex in its own right. It deals with a full spectrum of pitch, with bending pitch, with going in and out of those pitches. But then you get this, which is very much complex, just in a different way. On the simple melodic line, it's almost laughably childish how they're going do, 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 you know, and only going on these diatonic notes and not using any of the incredible, this entire world, this entire dimension of music that exists between the diatonic pitches. But they stack different simple melodic lines one over the other, and it gives you another form of complexity that is harmonic, that is vertical. While editing the video, I noticed that there's a point that I could have made, which is that I think one of the reasons why post-medieval European musicians were so eager to belittle the medieval musical repertoire is that generally there's this sense in culture that we've had ever since the Renaissance that medieval Europeans were an unsophisticated, unwashed bunch of morons, that they didn't understand anything, that they were, some backward swamp. And of course it wasn't the case. The medieval Europeans were an incredibly sophisticated people. They produced works like the great cathedrals, literature like the Matter of France and the Matter of England. And medieval music, contrary to now outdated models of ethnomusicology that are still being taught, unfortunately, was not some primitive failure. It very much was an incredibly rich repertoire that in some ways attained sophistications that subsequent European music could not achieve.
Je vois du vin clairé, habite autour aussi désormais je vois un jour Arbel, chantons et buvons à flacons faisons la guerre. Chantons et buvons, mes amis.
And so it's just another form of complexity. But the notion that European music was primitive before the Renaissance and finally became complex, that is not supported by a modern analytical, musicological assessment of facts. It's a little more complex than this. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon for another subject. Goodbye.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Very rich, rich stuff going on there.
Well, and his point about like moving from complex to complex was spot on. I mean, it it wasn't simplified, it was just shifted.
A different form of complexity. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, fantastic analysis, history lesson. We will be looking more at the history of music and music around the world, and I think that's a great start.
Absolutely. Did we have his page there?
Yes, this was.
He was a new find this week for me, I think, as well.
Oh yeah, a great find. This was at Farya Faraji.
Nice.
Yes, he has a whole bunch of videos on different moments in musical history, some of his music. And
The polyphony was one of the ones I like the best. Is when you have two different melody lines running at the same time. There aren't that many examples of that in current modern popular music, but there are tons of examples that you could come up with where you just basically put different melody lines together, but they contrast in certain ways, they work together in ways. It's an interesting way to go about things. This
well,
polyphony.
and mixing microtonal melodies. Like at the end there, the example they were doing with vocals. I wish I had thought of searching, because when I was searching for this, I thought of guitars, I thought of keyboards and instruments like that, but I hadn't thought of the benefits of microtonality in vocals.
Oh yeah, that was one of the ones that I was gonna mention as well. Is just that is one of the instruments. It was the frets on the guitar that really got us locked into those tones when we do that, and the keyboard. The fact that those are the tones that are on the keyboard. But some of these other instruments that we deal with, or these new instruments that we talk about, imagine one that's just an entire touch surface, and as you go left and right, you're going from low pitch to high pitch. That's also microtonal, where you're getting all those pitches in between, doing a sweep from low to high, for example. But it's about landing on the certain pitches and how you use them, and the fact that you don't necessarily use all 24 of the microtonal pitches or all 1,000,000 of the microtonal pitches if you're using everything.
Well, like that earlier video we were watching where he mentions like, I'm using these more as passing notes
Exactly.
than as like notes I want to hit in a chord. These are transitional notes.
And in fact, using the blue note, or using some of those, that same theory, like using the blue note is something that's not normally in the pentatonic scale, but it's in between two notes. It's in between the 4 and the 5. So we would use that. So the same idea is here, where for the microtonal ones, anywhere that you would normally put a bend on the guitar, that's one of those places that you can go and get into there. And if you want to slide into a chord, for example, you just start one half fret, let's call it one half fret before, and slide into it, and that way you get a distinctive slide, but from from a microtone down.
Now, do you think you could do that with a fretted guitar if you're fretting hard next to the fret, not into the center?
It's more if you wanted to get those tones, you could basically just bend partway. So like if I wanted to get that slide effect coming in from I guess halfway, like let's say A half flat to A, so I'm going from that microtone below A into an A, I could go down to that A flat and bend halfway up the whole chord. So I bend it slightly up and then slide from there into the unbent A. It would be a tricky move, but it's something that you could do in theory to get that kind of a sound. But at the same time, you could just as easily just bend from that A flat into the A bend, but slide, because then you're getting that same kind of effect. Because the idea is where you're landing, not necessarily where you started. So you're getting that ambiguous start from the boo-doo and just kind of sliding up into something.
So a guitarist who's trying to understand microtonality might improve their slides and their understanding of how to get those middle notes just by being aware
Yeah,
that there
and
there
just doing
is tones in between the tones.
Yep, exactly. And just going like as an example, going between, let's say, E and F, and knowing that there's stuff in between there that you could like get in there and stop there. And with a guitar, you could just sit there and bend that part way, have a backing track that's just in E, for example, and then you see how that plays against it. And then, okay, well, what does it sound like with between the G and the A flat? And you can explore that kind of range, and you see which ones, sound. I mean, some of them will sound good, some of them will sound very bad, and some of them will just sound like they don't really belong. But you'll figure out which ones you want to use, and then also figure out where you would put them in your phrases if you're playing things pentatonically or chromatically or diatonically, depending on what you're working on.
So I think it's definitely a good idea for any musician out there to explore, the microtonal world. Even if you don't get an instrument like that, it will help in your understanding of the instrument you do play.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it might get you thinking of a different approach to writing that Western style music.
And one tip would be don't break out microtonal songs at an open jam when you're just going to jump up with other people. Okay, this one's an A half flat major with, because you will get thrown out. They will show you the door.
Or they will give you a trophy.
They say, how about you play this one by yourself, and we'll watch. No,
Well,
very, very informative. A lot of good stuff in there.
I really enjoyed that, dude. I will be going through his whole history.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do we
Now,
got lined up next? Beato.
We have a counter response to the whole microtonal world, and what Rick suggests is to check out Polychromatics, which I actually I found a ton of shit on this, but I'd already filled up all our slots with the microtones, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to have a polychromatic night.
Yeah. We're halfway into the subject, just to get kind of dip the toe in the waters of the polychromaticism, and then we'll come back to it another day.
And I always got to check out when we're looking at a particular subject. If Rick has anything to say about it, he is everything music.
Oh, absolutely.
He's the source for a response to this.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see what Rick got to say.
So forget microtones, check out Polychromatics.
Mm-hmm.
Had an interest in microtonal music, and I've been fascinated by some of the MIDI controllers that have come out over the past 10 years or so. I saw a TED Talk with Dolores Catharino and listened to some of her polychromatic pieces on her YouTube channel. In this clip, she's using a Star Labs Microzone U648 MIDI controller. It has 288 keys, and the sound she's using with this particular piece has 106 separate pitches. She has a great overview of polychromatic music and the instruments that she uses that I'll provide in the description below. After listening to her piece Convergence, I was wondering what my son Dylan would think of it. With his acute sense of pitch, what would his reaction be? So I decided to play it for him and see. Okay, so Dylan, nothing that's in that bothers you, that it's out of tune or quarter tones, right?
Right. I don't listen to the notes. I just listen to the music.
And that music sounds cool?
Yes.
What's it remind you of?
Retro music.
What's that mean?
It's from video games back in the 90s, like Super Mario.
That has sounds like that?
Yes.
It's probably because of the way the synthesizer sounds. It uses old synthesizer kind of square wave sounds. But when you're hearing it, and you could recognize that things were not perfectly in pitch, right?
Yes, but I don't pay attention to them.
Even the standard keyboard has been reimagined with a continuous touch-responsive surface, like in this Roly Seaboard MIDI interface. Here's my friend Jordan Rudis playing the Seaboard Rise 49 controller. This uses the form factor of a 2/3 piano, but with quarter tone resolution. I decided to bring Dylan back in the studio to see what his process is for interpreting quarter tones. When you're hearing microtones, if I said, can you sing between an F and F sharp? Can you do that right now? Play F. Play F sharp. Sing it again. Okay, so how are you doing that exactly?
So I think of a note that I want to blend it with, and let's say I'm doing F and F sharp. I think of the first note. It doesn't matter if it's F sharp or F. So I play it in my head. Then I think of F sharp and I play that in my head. And then I blend them together and sing them as one. Just think of them as one note.
I find this very interesting, the idea of polychromatic music. For those of you that are interested in tuning systems like A432, I think this would be particularly interesting for you. And I provided a link to Dolores's page in the description below. That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. And if you're interested in the Beato book, you can go to my website at www.rickbeato.com and find it there. Also, remember, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. Thanks for watching. I'm Rick Beato.
I was wondering the same thing as him when he asked him, like, you know, how does that sound to you? Does it hurt?
Right. I was like that first video. It was almost like he was videoing, like, when's his head going to explode? Like as he starts playing the music with the all the crazy tones in there, because all that was you know, very much not in the same, you know, the usual 12-tone style that we usually do. But I can see why it wouldn't bother him. It's more relational, relationships between notes. And you know, you can tell that, you know, that's not, you know, like he said, it's not an F and an F sharp, it's in between. And the fact that the voice is one of the first things that is capable of doing notes in between notes, because we can very smoothly go across the entire spectrum of notes. So we can easily sing in those half notes.
And like Dylan's response was, you know, I just listened to the music. That's more likely to sound uncomfortable to somebody who doesn't have perfect pitch than somebody who does.
Yeah, because it is technically on the more, let's say, complex side of music, where a lot of people, they're expecting, you know, the 1-4-5, or they're expecting very comfortable chord progressions and everything's in that, you know, the expected notes. And a lot of times even just the pentatonic scale, even just those 5 notes, you can get a whole lot of mileage, and people can love, you know, music all day that's just pentatonic all day. But you know, you can make it more interesting by adding diatonic notes, but to some people that just makes it too complicated.
Well, and he was really testing them there. He was playing all notes that were mid notes, like it wasn't like using as a passing note as it slid up to it, but he was really testing them there.
It does open up so much more real estate, or so many more possibilities as to what you can do melodically, that I mean, I imagine that most of it hasn't even been explored yet, not just because there's so many more options. Like, we haven't come close to exploring everything we can do with 12-tone music. So there's, you know, even more options where you can go halfway in between every one of those. You could play a song that's almost all 12-tone and then throw in a couple of the 24-tone tones here and there, a couple of the half sharps or half flats. And now it's microtonal, but the majority of it was, you know, in our typical 12s together.
You know, that would make a good experiment with the AI and ChatGPT, and see what it's actually learned about microtonal music, what they fed it.
Yeah, because it's a lot of ground. How do you find melodic phrases that use some of those, you know, some of those half sharp and half flats that still sound melodic in a 12-tone scale? Or it doesn't have to sound melodic. It can also be that even if every one of them added more tension, that's, you know, tension and release is another big part of music. So, you know, you can use all these microtones to just add tons of tension to a spot. Like, you're already as tense as you can get. Well, take that and go take that F sharp that already sounds tense, go to F sharp and a half, and see how that sounds. Exactly. Take it
th-
over the top and then
this
resolve.
stuff could certainly work great in like cinematic music where you're trying
Oh
to
yeah.
incorporate that sound into the scene.
Yeah. And my other thought on the when he was talking about the complexity with the voice doing the melismas and going up and down versus the multiple voices making the harmony complicated, whereas the individual voices were staying very much on individual notes. You could also do a combination where you just have the one voice doing the changes. Like I saw in one of the pieces that he put up with the sheet music, you could see like the top voice did one little quick, da da da, and then right after that the middle voice does a da da da, and then right after that the lower voice, da da da. Like they all, the effect is that it's just one long run, but it's like the voices are handing off. So like the top voice did a little piece of the run, then handed it to the middle one takes over, and then the hands to the bottom one takes over.
And,
So having each of the melody pieces doing their own little parts.
and we see that in like the more complex, the jazzy music where one instrumentalist kind of throws the musical frisbee to the other one, and a solo is like four different people through the run.
And if you had four people or four voices, let's say, doing that kind of, the stuff that we talked about there, where everything is very much just regular 12-tone scale, but then the one voice adds some of those other ones in there, and then it hands to the other one, and then the middle one will start doing, some of those voices, while the top one goes back to the regular 12-tone. So you can have one that's doing microtonal, one voice doing microtonal at a time, but overall, everybody else is keeping it all together with the diatonic stuff.
If you really get creative between the notes and then having somebody play the notes in the middle, if you do it in the right timing, you can really make it sound like it's sliding.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That was Rick Beato, one of the best YouTube channels out there when it comes to music. Everything music, you get it at this channel.
Tons and tons of stuff.
He showed going into the next video that I found, Dolo Muse at YouTube. Oh, this is another channel I'm going to be eating up. Look at her setup. Like she is playing with every one of those new controllers we've been looking at. Mm-hmm. She's got them all.
Yeah, but I see the one up on the top right there. That was the one that was just in that video.
Yeah, that's the one he was testing them with.
Yep.
Look at that one below it. I don't know what it is, but I want one.
Exactly.
Oh, and she's a Mac user. Damn. Almost perfect.
Hey, for music, there's nothing wrong with it.
And this is going to show us some examples of what you can do with this approach. Now, this is polychromatic, but it all goes back to these microtones.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Right, even just going to different setups than the 12-tone that we usually use.
And she is popular as hell in this field. When I was doing this searching, Dolores Catherino name kept coming up everywhere. I mean, she stands out.
All right.
So she's going to give us an introduction into this polychromatic music that Rick suggests we should consider.
Mm-hmm.
Where did I put hers?
I think we have that one up in the cloud storage. We still have the other one open over there, so you might want to close that first. There we go. That is a cool setup. I really do think that one underneath there, it almost looks like all faders on there, like a mixer, but I'm sure that's not what they're for.
Yeah, that's what I thought at first too, was it was a mixer, but it doesn't look like your traditional mixer.
Exactly.
Okay, here we go. I found it.
Mm-hmm.
instrument here is called a continuum, and it's a beautiful, initially I thought of it as a ribbon controller, but it's polyphonic. So you can play one note per finger, and beautiful touch sensitivity. And then this one just came out. It's called a C-board, and it also has the touch sensitivity. It was built with a form factor like a piano, so you could see this 2/3 pattern, which is common to all of these instruments. But it also has a touch sensitivity, but much lower resolution of pitch. With this one, it's seamless. And when you go to this instrument, you can hear that it's in quarter tones, the resolution. So as you're it's much more grainy. I can hear every single pitch as it goes down. It sounds like a glissando, but it's much more of a coarse resolution versus that one, which just sounds much more full to me. The difficulty with this instrument is that trying to play a flat surface and keep your fingers in alignment to play things, the pitches you want to play, it's very difficult. You really have to use your eye and your ear. And this instrument tried to use the form factor of the old keyboard so that you know where your hands are if you play the piano. It's very easy to switch from the technique of the standard keyboard. But the trade-off is that you're locked into that kind of a system with 12 pitches, maybe 24 pitches per octave. I hope later that there's an innovation where you can maybe get rid of this typical pattern of an old-fashioned keyboard, so that you just have these ridges, these generic ridges, and you can program it any way that you want and not be locked into the old system. In response to a lot of people that have been asking what in the world is going on over here in my little laboratory, I wanted to try to give a little bit of background of the developments as I see them for music in the future, and how I kind of went from 12 pitches per octave to 106. It seems like a big jump, but once you start to understand the process of it, it makes total sense. And looking back from the future imaginatively, it makes total sense to me that our chromatic system would evolve to a polychromatic system. And the addition of color and the intersection of art and music makes sense. All right. So the difference with these two instruments is that these are what I would consider polychromatic instruments. A chromatic instrument is more like a keyboard where you have your tones from C to C chromatically. Like these two instruments, you have the tones in one linear direction. With a polychromatic instrument, you have tones in this vertical dimension as well. So you have C red, C orange, C blue, C violet, however you want to configure it. Same thing here. I program it so that it's C orange, C yellow, C green, C blue, C violet. The other distinguishing factor of a polychromatic instrument is that you can play more than one tone in this vertical color dimension. So I can play a C orange and a C blue. So it allows you far more freedom to actually incorporate all of these color tones and the beauty of the kind of chords that you can't get on any other instrument, like let's see here. Let's see. It's like a second language. I have to translate and figure out what I'm doing here. Let's see. The sound of the, to me it's like colors and shapes that evolve over time. It gives a sense of pulling away. So the thing that's captivating about this instrument is that it just, the sounds that it unlocks, the shapes, the colors, we don't really have words for it, but in the ear, it's beautiful, and it's something you've never heard before or can never hear on a traditional keyboard layout. So for me, that's where the future lies, and that's why I do all my sketch compositions, and I write them down in music notation and in kind of a hybrid tab notation like this here, because generally tab is thought of as telling you how to play something without telling you the notes. And this tells me the notes, the colors, using alphabetical notation. So this is kind of a hybrid between tab notation and standard notation. If you think of tab notation as telling you how to play something, like what finger on what fret. This is telling you which note and which color of that note to play using an alphabetical notation. And then it also tells you how to play it on this keyboard with a layout so that it incorporates both. And then I also translate this into polychromatic music notation, which is standard notation with the colors added and some symbols. There was a big jump between 12 pitches per octave and 106. But for me, the big breakthrough was to think of it polychromatically in terms of color. So I always wondered why in the 21st century our music notation system was still black and white. And so when I started colorizing pitch, it transferred to notation so easily that it just allowed a great expansion in the number of pitches we could handle per octave. When I was in school studying microtonal notation, it just gave me a headache with all of these inconsistent squiggly lines or fractions before a note, still all in black and white. And to me, it's this wonderful convergence of music and visual art to open up a system from black and white chromatic systems, like looking at a piano and the black and white keys, moving into a whole nother dimension of color. And that's the way with this tonal plexus the keyboard is programmed. It's probably hard to see, but I've marked it with little color tape so I can see where I'm at and transcribe what I'm doing. You see just like the color spectrum, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and the way that it's programmed is these are a fifth apart. That's the interval of a perfect fifth. So you have green here and a green with a dot, yellow here, yellow dot, orange, orange dot. And then as we go up, the fifths are above. So with that consistency of color as a guide, it greatly expanded the possibilities for pitch palettes, colored pitch palettes. And again, it's that merging of visual art with auditory art. It's amazing. The harmonies and the colors are so rich, the resolution is so high for our ear that there's so much to hear that I really make an effort to keep the rhythm and the melody very, very simple, so that we can start to appreciate and hear all of these changes, the shapes and the colors. And as you get used to that sound, that's when the fun happens and you can add all the rhythm and the complexity of melody. But I think that's going to be pretty far off in the future at this point. The difficulty is that the instruments that you're working with that are from the mechanical era, or say a saxophone, a clarinet, a violin, they would have great difficulty playing pitches at this high of a resolution. So I don't know if there will be other instruments besides electronic instruments, other than the voice, that can move forward with this system. In the future, I really hope that the samples, the sounds that you can use with this instrument will be a much, much higher resolution in terms of harmonics and going beyond 20 kilohertz. I'd like to see a new format that's even higher resolution than a wave file. I think that as we open up the upper harmonics, that we're going to find a lot more beauty there. It's just not quite possible yet with the limitations of speakers and recording formats. And hopefully in the future, as computer storage becomes less of an issue, we can look forward to that kind of increased resolution, not only of our pitch palette, but of the sounds that we use to perform in polychromatic music. And how could you not be inspired living in Alaska?
Oh, I love her.
Yes, yes, indeed, and a most excellent instrument there.
Oh, she
Several of
had
them.
a couple of excellent instruments. That one that
Mhm.
looked like the mixer board, I think, was her
Yep.
coolest controller, and I love how she color coded them to identify
On
with
closer
the
inspection, it
fits.
almost looked more like Lego. It almost looked like Lego buttons.
And
But I get
she
it.
makes a good point. I think she summed up what we've been looking at all this time. It's about resolution of these notes across the intervals. You know, as they develop better resolution with the sound, instead of sampling, typically they'll sample a piano and they'll capture each note sample. If you want to sample a piano for this approach, you're going to have to sample that piano at those intervals to get a true sample.
Right.
If you force the machine to shift it, it can, but it's not going to
Get the digital manipulation. Yeah, it
it's
won't
not
sound
going to be
exactly
as
the same.
natural.
Yep.
And
Very interesting, and lots of different flavors for each note is very
I,
cool.
I, I love her energy about it, because she's like,
Mhm.
this is what they're going to have to do in order to develop this more.
Yeah, and agreed that the things like horns would have a very difficult time with this type of a thing. But any of the stringed instruments, like we were talking about fretless bass before, that is one of those things where we can access all of those tones, like all of those interesting tones that she can get to on all of those. Whether you cut the octave into 106 or 1200, however many increments you want to cut it into, we can get to all of them on a fretless bass because it's just about how far along you go. If you want me to get to you know C half sharp, that's fine. If you want me to get to C a quarter sharp, that's fine. If you want me to get to C 1/10 sharp, yep, we can do that too. It's like you can do all of that on a fretless, but getting precise with where you're landing, that's not nearly as easy. Whereas with her keyboard, she's being able to program each of those targeted spots for each of those tones, which is
Yeah,
kind of
it
cool.
makes it almost foolproof once you've got it set up.
Mhm. Yeah, I like it. And it does, it forces you to think about things in a different way. On the one that was it looked like the solid gray surface that looked like a keyboard, though. My question was, how like are they squishy when you hit if you're trying to hit one of the notes, and like if you're trying to slide between notes, how does that work on there, or is it like touch sensitive? It did look like down below the notes, it was just a smooth continuum where you could just drag a finger across the bottom and smoothly go through all the tones on the way
Yeah,
down.
and
But like she was saying, she could hear the difference between those, but they were pretty close together still. I mean, it was, way more than 12 for octave,
yeah,
right?
I think she's naturally a pianist. Like, the surface issues she felt like she mentioned on that first controller. It's
Hmm.
tricky
Yep.
playing on a flat surface. I would feel the
I could see
same
that.
way.
Yeah.
Like I've played a
Hmm.
virtual keyboard on a iPad, and Sure, it plays the
Yep.
note that I hit, but it doesn't feel like a keyboard.
Yeah, feeling the notes, and having taken piano lessons and gotten comfortable with playing on a keyboard, knowing, being able to feel where those black keys are definitely makes the difference. It's the landmarks, because it's just, they're in twos and threes, and you're either by a two or you're by a three, so you can find where you are and figure out what you need to do to get to the notes or chords.
And the feeling that's natural to you, like when I hit a keyboard, the feeling that I get of the keys, that's part of the musical experience. If all of a sudden you've
Yep.
got this new instrument and not only are you feeling it that way, but you're feeling it in directions or rubber pads.
Mm-hmm. And that's where also on the iPad is where I had experienced some of that, where I played some of the keyboards that they had on the iPad, and obviously it's a small screen, so you're not trying to do full two-hand positions or any of that kind of thing, but just again, landmarking, or even just the parallax, where the angle that you're looking at it looks like I'm hitting a B, but actually my finger's on the C, because I'm looking at it from this angle over here, so it was harder to get precise. But I did enjoy that for doing it on the iPad. For that one, the Magic Keyboard was cool. Going different chords. Like it has a C chord, and it's got 6 different ways of playing a C chord from low to high. So it'll just do different inversions as you go up. But then like the very bottom 3 are just the low bass notes of the triad. So you're hitting you have access to a lot of good material to work with very easily, and to be able to just hit this and then hit that and just go back and forth. Good layout. And also the guitar was fun, because you could do bends and all that on the on-screen guitar with the iPad as well.
And she said the jump from traditional to polychromatic was 12 to 106 steps.
That's what she jumped
Wow.
to, yeah. And the thing is,
That
though,
really
if you think about
does
it, like,
open up.
but she's not really using 106. I mean, she's not using all 106, but having it divided into 106 means that she can choose different spots to go. Like she was showing with, let's say, 4 different flavors of that C, for example. That could be 4 of those 106. So 4 different flavors of C, from like a more sour, like a flatter flat C, to a flat C, to a sharp C, to a sharper
See,
sharp
and this
C.
is where
you can have that
this
whole
is where
spectrum.
the color mentality starts to come in handy, because if you have different flavors of C, well, one might be green. It's like eating a bag of Skittles, except it's musical note Skittles.
Yeah. One's a little bit sour and this one's really sweet.
And if I want to get crazy, I'll just grab a handful.
Now you could either do it with color, you could also do it with brightness, kind of, where you could have a darker C or a brighter C in that kind of way. If you had to do it still on black and white, for example, you could still manage to get the nuance in there using shades of gray, or black and white.
Well, I like that musicians are thinking more visual as much as the actual sound, because a visual approach to an instrument sometimes makes that instrument easier to pick up. I think
Absolutely.
because there's black and white keys on a piano, made it a hell of a lot easier than if you were to stare and all the keys were all white or all black.
Yep. And I've said it many times to anybody who has never played piano, who wants to, I wish I could just sit down at a piano and make something that sounded nice. Just sit down at a piano and just play the black notes, and just play them up and down a little bit and see what it feels like to land and kind of hang out on each one, because there's only 5 notes, but they repeat. Any of those, just like go on any of them, land on any of them, start on any of them. It doesn't matter, and you'll get something that sounds good, because that's a pentatonic scale. That's by taking the 12-note scale, or the 12-tone scale that we use, and only using 5 of those notes. So we're leaving 7 of them out, but it gets you that nice flowing line that you hear. A lot of vocal lines all stay well within that, and melody lines, solo lines, all that kind of stuff. A lot of people use minor or major pentatonic in their solos. A lot of times they'll throw extra notes in if they're going to do the throw that little flat 5 in there, sharp 4.
See, now anytime
note.
I see someone new to the piano, that like someone young, like my niece, when she first jumped on my piano in Connecticut, I told her just hit one note at a time.
Yeah.
Start
and get comfy with how it
hitting
sounds,
one note at a time and see which notes sound good with each other, and that's how you start out with the piano.
Yeah, exploration is important, absolutely, and getting comfortable with how it feels to hit the note, how hitting it this hard sounds like this, hitting it this hard sounds like that. It's important to get that relationship between you and the piano. When my nephew was taking piano lessons, he got to one point where he really loved playing loud. So he had gotten one piece that was it was like a Halloween time, so it was a really spooky piece, and it was meant to be played like fortissimo and really loud. And he just loved, like, you come over here, hey, you want to play that song? He just like run to the piano and boom, boom, boom. Because
that's how my nephew was. He was the pounder. Olivia was like,
it's like you can play loud.
Just hit one note. She followed the instructions. She just hit one note at a time. And once you get comfortable hitting one note, then you start figuring out two notes together.
Yeah, you start expanding everything out. Yeah, and see how things sound together. I always like the taking every other note, even if you just do all white notes and you just do every other note.
Nice little thirds.
Sounds really nice. And it's really easy. And that's, I just used these two fingers, so I just didn't do anything fancy with the fingering or anything. I just kind of bounced them on up. You might recognize that as well. It's the beginning of a song.
Couple.
All that kind of thing. But yeah, definitely an excellent exploration into different controllers, and definitely jealous of that setup. That's some very cool keyboards.
Oh yeah, I will be keeping my ears on Dolores.
Absolutely. A new find for me this week. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, we're on a roll, man.
Yeah.
And this was a new find for us a couple weeks ago when we were looking at some of these new MPE controllers, and the guy gives great reviews. He's going to these cool ass shows and checking them out. That's a resource, because most of us can't make it to these, and you want somebody who does like give a good review of what they find there.
Absolutely.
So he's going to show us his favorite gear that he found at Superbooth 2023.
All right.
Hi and welcome. I just arrived back from Superbooth, and boy, it was quite the ride. It's always a pleasure going to conventions when you know you're going to discover new things and gear that's not available on the market yet. And I believe there's some true innovation happening in the electronic music industry. So I was super excited to take a flight to Berlin and see all the new gear that's about to be released. If you're new to Superbooth, it's basically an electronic music trade show / festival, where hardware manufacturers and software developers gather for a couple of days to showcase new music gear. Everyone that basically has something to do with electronic music is there, so there's big companies like Yamaha and Korg to more niche and upcoming smaller companies. It's a great chance to meet the hardware manufacturers and the people behind the products that we use in our studios. While this was my personal first time at Superbooth, I can't speak highly enough about this arrangement, the people behind, the beautiful site, because it's located in a park / forest called Fes, not a game Fes. And there's always new things to discover, and the friendliness of the people at the show and the people behind the arrangement. At Superbooth I also got a chance to meet some fellow YouTubers like Bo Beats, Aura, Liam Killen, Thomas Foster, and many more. I obviously also got a chance to exchange a few words with the people behind Bitwig Studio, and while strolling the park I also bumped into this guy. The man, the myth, the legend behind the Clap plugin technology, Alexander Biquet. Clap is basically an open source plugin format that's now deeply integrated into Bitwig Studio. Finally, I also got a chance to meet some of the people that enrolled my Bitwig Studio Masterclass, and some of you guys that just watch my videos on YouTube. And it's always super fun to talk to you guys and hear what kind of content you like on my channel and what you want to see in the future here on my channel. Okay, I think it's due time we talk about my favorite things from Superbooth 2023. If you follow my channel, you know I'm a piano player at heart, and so I got a chance to speak with Christopher Hans at Expressive E about the new Osmos synth. The Osmos synth basically takes the MIDI controllers into the future with a totally new and innovative keybed. So you have new ways of playing expressive with the keyboard. So unlike your old trusty MIDI keyboards, with the Osmos synth you have much more performance options, like you can wiggle the keys to do like pitch bends, and this also works on multiple keys at the same time. So it's a polyphonic MIDI controller with the new MPE technology. And the Osmos also has many other performing techniques, which we might dive into in a later video. What I also liked about the Osmos and the team behind this instrument is that they put a lot of effort into the design and the build quality. And it's also awesome that they licensed the sound engine from Haken Audio. I actually met the guy behind the Haken Audio at NAMM 2020, but basically they have an audio engine called the Egan Matrix, and it can do FM, virtual analog, and also physical modeling synthesis. So within the Osmos there's tons of awesome sounding presets that utilize this kind of MPE technology. Now I know that everybody's going to have their own favorite from a big trade show like a Superbooth, but the Osmos really clicked with me because it feels like the next generation of a keyboard and a really natural step in the performance options that you can have on a keyboard. Right, some more worthy mentions from the show is of course the new analog heat effects version from Electron. While the original analog heat was basically made to beef up your master mix with like saturation and overdrive, the new analog heat effects adds compressor, tape emulation, reverbs and delays. And it's also awesome that you can rearrange the different effects in various ways to suit your specific effect chain. Erica Synths, which is another innovative synth company, showcased a new synth module called the Steam Pipe. So let's have a quick listen. So the Steam Pipe is also something new and feels fresh and innovative in the synth field. Another booth that rocked my shoes at Superbooth was the Dreadbox booth, where they showcased a new synth module called Telepathy. Telepathy is an analog synthesizer Eurorack module with deep modulation, and I really enjoyed their demo. Telepathy will be available as a single Eurorack module, but you can also buy a bundle with a modular case and 6 telepathy modules and 1 psychosis module, which is basically your mixer module, so you can connect these together and play them polyphonically or in unison. Right, so that's a quick walkthrough of my Superbooth and my favorites from the convention. Now I'd like to hear what your favorites are from the Superbooth 2023 show is. Please write me in the comments. My name is Matthias, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Oh, he likes the Osmos too.
Mhm.
That one is really
Indeed.
getting rave reviews across all the MIDI guys and keyboardists out there are talking about that.
And the key wiggle is one of those things that you hear about that was never an option for a long time. So that is one of the newer things that they do hear about.
And the fact that it does come with like 3 different types of synthesizer engines gives it a lot of versatility in the sound that's built in. Because with these MPE controllers, if you're talking to another synthesizer, the synthesizer has to recognize this new MIDI format. Otherwise, the sound can't take advantage of it. So you do want sounds to be built into those controllers.
Mm-hmm. It's a whole new field to check into.
And
new stuff.
What
going
I
on.
find interesting is you're still seeing development in synthesis. Like 3 of the things he mentioned are modern analog synthesizers. The synthesizing is still evolving. It's not a dead sound format these days. They're coming up with new types of synthesis.
Yeah. And there will be new things and new ways to do new controllers, and we'll keep bringing them to you because we've got bunches of different ones. We find ones that are keyboard like, we find other ones that are guitar like. We'll, as things come up, we'll come up with new controllers to do new types of things with music, even notes between the notes and things
New
like
sounds, new instruments, and new notes.
that. Yep. These aren't your daddy's 12 notes.
So that was Matthias Holmgren,
Mhm.
Holmgren over at YouTube. And if you're a gearhead like me, you're gonna
Yeah.
love his channel because he checks, especially the MIDI gear. For me, that's
Mhm.
a definite subscribe. See?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like that. Absolutely. We'll be back for more on that channel for sure.
Oh yeah, if he keeps getting his hands on all the gear that he's getting his hands on, he's a
Mhm.
go-to.
Absolutely.
And I think this guy's gonna become a go-to too, because
Mhm.
when it comes to just wide range of sound discussions, and it can be anything from best cables to how to do this in a mix.
Mhm.
There's everything here. I mean, like he says,
Yeah.
it's here for musicians and audio engineers, which are two different things sometimes.
Yeah. I happen to live in both
Yeah,
camps, but
same here.
not everybody does.
Well, one helps you appreciate the other. So,
Oh yeah.
becoming an audio engineer has helped me to appreciate trying to be a musician.
Absolutely. And even just the development of the ear and noticing when I started being able to pick out all the individual instruments in a mix, even if the sound space is all squished together, that sort of a thing has really also helped me out with instruments or with music in general, being able to now sit in with a group, hear what people are playing, and be able to say, okay, this guy's playing this person's playing this, and I have this much room to do what I want to do here, so kind of figure out where I fit in with what's going on with the rest of
Find
the
your
mix.
sound pocket. Yeah.
Yep. I do find that a lot of times with if people aren't used to playing with other players, and especially with guitar players, a lot of guitar players, they get just kind of tied up in the whole this is it's my moment, I'm just gonna do bam solo all the time, right? So like some people, they do kind of just fire into it and just go nuts over everything, and they don't do the give and take that would really be happening if you were used to playing with people more. And we see it a lot of times with with an open jam. If I was at an open jam with like my regular band and somebody was sitting in with us, and you would definitely notice, if you look, somebody just walked in the door and saw 5 people on stage, they would know which 4 are the band and which guy is just kind of sitting there hanging out with the band, because they wouldn't necessarily
The
flow with
tambourine
everybody else in the
player.
same way. Yeah, he's famous though.
Mhm.
He's in every video. Famous. But it happens, I mean, it's one of those things that when you go to these jams, a lot of times people go to the jams and they don't have a band, so this is their opportunity to get on stage and play with other people. So I love being able to just jump up with people of all kinds of skill levels, and they're willing to get up there, they're putting in the effort, they're going to put themselves out there. I'm definitely on board with helping them do that. And a lot of times it's like you got to feed me something. Like if I'm playing bass, it's like we can get up there. It's like, hey, do you know this song? It's like not really. Just give me just play me. Oh, it's a. If you can just do that, I can be like, okay, I can make that work. Like if you can give me that little, I can make that work. But if you just give me
Yes, that's a trickier.
and you just start doing that, and then you're looking at me like, well, come on, you do the thing. And it's like, well, I can do the thing, but I need to know which thing to do to match that, because that you're supposed to be fitting that over something that's already structured, right? But we got to figure out what the structure is, because I can just start playing stuff, but what you're doing is not going to fit over what I'm playing, because I need to know what you're doing, and doesn't tell me a lot. So just give me that very thing at the beginning, just a blom, blom, blom. You can go around twice, so I know it's a little loop, and then I'll play that for you all day. I'll just stick to something nice and simple, keep a nice little bed there, and you just do whatever you want. And
Yeah,
you're good.
trying to start a jam or write a song with the solo first is the hard route.
Yeah, and in this case, like let's say it's the guitar player. The guitar player knows the song, and the drummer and the bass player don't. And there's only the 3 of them on stage, so it's like, okay, so it's just gonna be a big long jam, and then the 2 of us trying to make it look like it's all supposed to work together.
Well,
But it's a fun exploration.
and the best way to improve as a musician is going and jamming with other humans in a room or
Yeah,
in an
absolutely.
open mic, in band at school. Those
Hmm.
opportunities to jam with others that way is always going to improve you.
And one thing that I would mention as a tip for anybody who's going, thinking about doing that or wants to go do that, is get used to playing along with music, but being able to, if you hit a wrong note, being able to just jump right back in. Like don't fret over it, don't redo that part, but just jump right back into what jump right back into the part. Because if you're on stage, you can hit a wrong note, you can miss a beat
Oh,
here
you
and there,
will.
but just jump right back in when you can, rather than you miss a note and you try to go back. Like some people in a recital, at a piano recital, they mess up a part, they try to go back to the beginning of that phrase and redo it again. And it's not a good thing to do, it's not what you should really do. But in a situation with multiple people on stage, everyone's not going to
The
stop and go jump
the
to that spot.
audience,
Everything's
the
going to derail.
audience and the listener will pick up more on a mistake if you start over than if you just
Yep.
power through it and get back into the
Yeah,
groove.
or even step back out. Like, you made a mistake, you just, silence. You can just stop what you were doing, not as a band, but just, that one part that could be like the end of your phrase. And then you pick back up when it comes back in. That's fine. It doesn't have to be notes every 8th note or every 16th note. You're not the only person in the band on stage. That's where everybody works together. Everybody has a moment to be out front or whatever. You don't have to as a bass player. I don't care. I don't ever need a spot out front. I'm fine just kicking back here and keeping things
Well, that's
rolling.
where playing in a band in that kind of situation, especially on stage, is good for getting comfortable with powering through. Because if you try to start playing the part over again, the rest of the band members are going to be looking at you like, what are you doing?
Yep.
It
Exactly.
forces you to stay in the groove.
Another thing is that when playing with people on stage, there'll be times where, let's say you start a song and, the words are supposed to kick in after you play this first phrase, the intro or whatever. You play the intro
And the
4
singer
bars, and then
fucks
someone's
up.
supposed to start the lyrics. And the singer doesn't have the lyrics out yet. Like
Yeah,
you get to the 4th bar
repeat.
and the singer's supposed to
You
start.
repeat the
So
bar.
you repeat. But that's the thing, is some people, they're so locked into, no, the way it is on the record is like this. Like after the 4th bar, it goes here. It's like, you got to be used to the fact that, be ready to adjust on stage, because, if they don't have it ready yet, yep, that's right. You just redo that same intro again. And by the time you get to that 4th bar, now they're ready. Boom. We
Well,
roll right in.
and
Everybody's fine. But if somebody was counting measures, they're
that's
in
why
trouble.
you do have band practice, so you get comfortable with your band members, and the part changes aren't always like, oh well, we play 4 measures, and then sometimes it's when the singer comes in, we play this long, and then we listen for this drum roll to go into the next part. Going in and out of solos, a lot of times they might play that solo like twice the measures if the guitarist is real. It's just knowing that cue moment to say we're coming out of the solo.
Yep, and you got to hear it coming or feel it coming, or you see the head nods and all that. And that's one where my eyes are usually down. Like I'm terrible about the fact that I always just kind of looking at my hand, but I'm doing the bass and I'm in the back, so I'm not the front man, so I'm not supposed to be Mr. Excitement.
I'm usually looking at
but
girls out in the audience like,
well,
fuck,
yeah.
man, you want me to look at the drummer?
Well, that's the thing, is I usually stand back far enough where the drummer can see both of my hands, because actually in the place that we've been playing lately, the drums are like in the corner. And so I'm right next to him, but he's on my right. So I'm usually looking at my left hand. So he mostly sees the back of my head. So like in order for him to really get a good eye at what I'm doing, I just kind of, the way I'm standing, he can see my picking hand and he can see my other hand. He can see my hands to be able to get the timing of what's going on. But my bass stack is basically aiming straight out into the bar. So it's going past him. He's over in the corner. So we started just turning my bass head, or the bass amp, just a little bit to the side, so that he can get a little bit of a side wash off of it, and it's enough. Plus, I started playing a little louder. Like I just started, I just turned it up even more. And just went, yeah, crank it up, man. It's fun though. We have a lot of fun with it. We've been playing new songs every week or two when we do go up there. We'll work on 4 or 5 new songs, break them on out, try them. People love that. I had some people come up actually this last week. Somebody came up and was, he said he basically told me that he's seen me up there a couple times playing, and he always enjoys seeing me play, and that he's a bass player, and he's like inspired by me playing there. And I'm like, I couldn't ask for a better, response of somebody coming up to me at the end of a jam. Like 5, 6 people all, thanked me for coming up and, had fun and all that. But, somebody else also coming up and being inspired by it makes the whole thing worthwhile. I mean, anybody being inspired, it's awesome.
That's what we all hope to do, making music.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now you guys must
And
use cables to do
we use lots of
those.
cables. Some of them are balanced, and some
Yeah,
of them are
yeah, yeah.
unbalanced.
The choice that you make. I mean, I know you've come to know the hiss and buzz that you can get from RCAs and
Oh yeah.
crappy cables and what XLRs, especially when they're quality ones, the sound difference when you're going to a mixing board to an audio interface, sometimes it's the cable that makes the difference between whether it sounds good.
And this is also very important information for troubleshooting when you are putting stuff together. Somebody says, "Hey, I've got a band here and they've got gear, and we started hooking everything together, and now they're getting a really loud hum." Knowing that this is one of the first places to look. If you see red and white, like those cables right there, that's a first place to look and see
Yes,
what's going
that's
on. 'Cause you got
that's
unbalanced
usually
stuff
where a
happening.
lot of that hum in the old days was coming from, especially if they weren't shielded
Mhm.
properly and you got them around computers and
Yeah,
other shit.
and somebody's cell phone sitting right on top. Yeah,
So
you'll also hear that. Like if you ever have put a cell phone near an amplifier, and you hear that the interference that happens, that kind of thing can also happen from improperly shielded cables or insufficiently shielded cables.
oh yeah, I got to
So
I
having a
have
cell
to
phone near
keep
that
my
guy.
cell phones at least 3 to 4 feet away from this speaker, my computer speaker, because
Mhm.
it crackles and does all sorts of shit.
Yeah, yeah. But once you recognize that as being the culprit, then that's where you can look to, if something does go bad, that's one of the first places you look. So this is important information, whether it's about choosing cables to use or whether it's just about knowing where your problems may be coming from with unshielded
And
cables.
most importantly, whether you have the options, because I've seen so many people who are like plugging in this way just because that's the only cable that they had. And here they've got
Mhm.
this mixer with an XLR plug-in, but they're not using it because they just had a 1/4-inch jack cable. If
Yeah.
if you
And a
can
lot of people, they
improve
use this.
your cable setup, you will improve your sound.
And some people will go this adapter into that adapter into this
Oh,
adapter into that
adapters.
adapter to get to this.
The-
And I mean, it works. Yes, you got the pinouts from here to there, and okay, fine. But if you get any kind of problem, you've just introduced 6 more points of failure in the middle, that any one of which could be the
And I'm
problem.
so conflicted with adapters. They're useful in a, quick pinch because you've got to do something that you don't normally do. But long-term adapter use in sound setups, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. But having adapters is important. That's where having a sound guy bag that has a bunch of stuff in it. Like one of the things that you're going to have in there is things like adapters,
Well,
like
yeah, especially
going from a male gender changer for
when
this,
you're
or
on the road.
1/4 inch to
When
XLR.
you're on the
Yeah.
road, you're on a gig, and we have to use a backup cable, and we need to switch it to something else. It's useful there, but when you're setting up your like studio at home, something where it
Right.
should not be changing constantly, you don't want
Yep.
adapters, and you don't want to be unplugging and plugging things in because you wear out tips.
Yep. It's true. Get it set up and plug it and forget it. And then you bring your instruments in. Your amps are already there. The microphones are in front of them, or you got your direct boxes, depending on how you're
And
doing
if you
things.
do have to like plug and unplug a lot, consider patch bays or something to actually deal with the plugging unplugging without messing up a mixer input or something.
That's also where snakes come in
Yeah.
handy as well. Like even in the studio, like out in Pennsylvania, one of the studios, we have big snake in the back as well. It's a small room, so we don't need it. Everything could run direct to the board, but by having everything running through the snake, it's just that one set, that one big set of connectors that goes into the back of the board, and that's all standard. It's all going over to the snake, and then if there's going to be any problem, if anybody trips on a cable, it's going to pull from the snake end. It's not going to pull anything
And
at
if
the
you're
board.
plugging and unplugging constantly for different tasks, I'd rather fuck up the extenders plug-in than the main board's plug-in.
Yeah. Plus, a snake is essentially designed to be, thrown out on the stage. Everybody plugs into it. Everybody unplugs from it. So plugging and unplugging on a stage box like that is something that's much more, it's much more tolerant of that. Whereas the board, you got connectors you're getting in the back. You don't want to put stress on them.
Snake,
you don't want to have somebody
the
trip on a
snake
cable
can be
that yanks to the
replaced
side.
at a fraction of the cost of the board.
Yeah. That's the other part. Yeah. And you can repair it as well. That's the other thing. It's easier to repair something like a snake because it's not that complicated. It's just, plugging in and sending that same signal over that way. And it's just, the idea is to basically be an extension cord, but it's an extension cord for, It could be 24, 24 signals going that way and 4 channels coming back this way. They do weigh a
yeah,
ton,
Snaves,
yeah.
those 16 channels, try a 24 or 32, man.
Well, what we started doing is we use 24, or we use a 16 for the front and an 8 for the back. So we have 2 snakes, but we can run, the one to the front line and one to the back line. If we run the 8 to the front line, that's where we can send all the microphones, and anything that's going to be right up front can come straight down into that snake, which is now right up at one of the front stacks. And we can also run 4 of the monitor outputs right across the front, coming out of there with A, B, C, and D. And then we can do the back snake is over by the drums. So we have the full drum kit just dropping straight into a snake. So you don't have to go far with the full drum kit hookup. And then you get all the amps and anybody in the back line coming over there. Plus you can do all the sends from A, B, C, and D over there. So that's where you can get 8 sends going out. So, you could do 8 mixes like that, but he usually does some of the in-ears. So like somebody will have 4 or 5 or 6 actual monitor mixes in for the individual microphones that are out there. Like everybody who's going to be singing is going to have a microphone, or is going to have a monitor in front of them, or they have in-ears, or both. And we'll have separate mixes for all that. So he'll manage, all those different mixes, as well as the main mix for the room. Sometimes we have a second sound guy or a third guy on the team where he has a separate iPad and he's only controlling the monitor mixes. So he hangs out by the band. And if one of the guys during the gig, the guitar player in between songs, he would go, hey, I need more of the keyboard player in my monitor mix, or I need less of the main vocal in my mix. And he'll do those kinds of adjustments.
It's nice to have options, especially like that.
Yeah. It actually makes it a lot easier.
And
makes it so that it sounds better and they're hearing what they need to hear to get a good performance, from them on stage. And that's all if they can hear well enough to perform well, then the house hears everything great as well.
And you do have options with cables, but they're not all created equal.
Correct. So let's see something about cables, balanced versus unbalanced.
Cables are capable of balanced connections, others are not. In this video, we'll take a look inside some of the most common audio cables to see how they work. At the end of the video, I'll demonstrate how big of a difference a balanced connection makes over a long distance. All that's coming up, but if this is our first time meeting, my name is Kyle. Welcome to Audio University. There are many ways that noise can enter an audio signal chain. And one of the most common sources of noise is other electronic devices. When I place this transformer next to other electronic devices, some of the current passing through those devices is induced onto the transformer and enters the audio signal. The electric currents flowing through any device create magnetic fields that could induce currents on nearby devices. And we're honestly very lucky to have the cable technology we have today to prevent that noise from ruining our recordings. When connecting audio devices together, you'll most likely be using one of these cables: XLR, 1/4-inch TRS, 1/4-inch TS, or RCA. Let's expose the wires on these cables to get a closer look at what's going on inside. The XLR and 1/4-inch TRS cables both contain a shield, a positive, and a negative. The 1/4-inch TS and RCA cables each have a signal wire and a shield or ground. The construction of these cables is important to understand why the first 2 cables can support balanced connections and the second 2 cables cannot. In Handbook for Sound Engineers, Bill Whitlock shares this definition of a balanced circuit. A balanced circuit is a 2-conductor circuit in which both conductors and all circuits connected to them have the same impedance with respect to ground and all other conductors. The purpose of balancing is to make the noise pickup equal in both conductors, in which case it will be a common mode signal that will be made to cancel out in the load. If I'm being honest, when I first read this definition, it just left me feeling more confused. And that's probably just because I don't have a very strong background in electrical engineering. You might feel the same way, so let's simplify this a bit. In any circuit, you'll find a driver, a line, and a receiver. A balanced receiver uses a differential device, which will only respond to the difference in voltage between the 2 wires on the interconnecting cable. So, if there's a voltage on one wire and not the other, the voltage will go through. This is an example of a differential mode signal. If there's an identical voltage on each wire, they will cancel out in the differential device. This is an example of a common mode signal, which results in common mode rejection. Now this is where it gets really interesting because we can use this to our advantage. Imagine an audio signal sent across one of the wires. When it reaches the differential device, it's allowed to pass through because it's a different voltage on each wire. However, along the way, there's some noise from nearby electronics that induces voltage onto the wires. The voltage that's induced is equal in both wires, so the differential device will completely cancel out that noise. Looking back at these audio cables, we can see that each of them consists of two conductors. The XLR and TRS cables do both have a shield, but the shield is irrelevant to its ability to form a balanced connection, so let's ignore that for right now. We can also see that the wires are twisted in the XLR and the TRS cables. This helps to ensure that the wires occupy the same average position over the length of the cable, so that any noise from nearby electronics will be equal in both wires. Before demonstrating the practical difference between a balanced and unbalanced connection, I want to make sure to mention a very common misconception about balanced audio. Sometimes an equal but opposite audio signal will be sent across each wire. While this has some additional benefits, it's not at all necessary to establish a balanced connection. The benefit of this is that the opposite signals will be summed together in the differential device. This is often said to be a requirement for a balanced connection, but in reality, the noise cancellation will still occur even if only one copy of the signal is sent across the audio cable. Now for a demonstration of the difference between a balanced and unbalanced connection. Right here, I've got 1,000 feet of 4-conductor cable, which gives me 2 pairs of conductors to work with. With a bit of soldering, I can wire one pair to be balanced and the other pair to be unbalanced. The balanced pair will be wired between pins 2 and 3 of the XLR connectors, and the unbalanced pair will be wired between pins 1 and 2. Right now, you're hearing my voice through the unbalanced connection. As you can hear, there is a lot of noise. Now you're hearing my voice through the balanced connection. The noise is still being picked up by the cable, but it's being canceled out by the differential device within the input of my audio interface. If you're like me and you enjoy appreciating the science and engineering that goes into creating audio devices, make sure to check out some other posts on the Audio University website.
Oh, I am like him.
Yep. And good demonstration there of the balance versus unbalanced. And that is what you'll hear when you've got some unbalanced stuff going on, and you'll know it. But you just got to figure out where it's happening and why. That's the important thing.
Yeah, I actually thought that was going on in my headphones. I was like, wait a minute, my headphone.
As soon as he started saying that, I prepared myself so I wouldn't have that reaction.
It's like when you hear somebody's
my headphones are
ringer,
famous for that.
you hear somebody else's ringtone and it's the same as yours.
Yep. For me, I put so much stress on the audio jack on my computer that when I move around, sometimes I will get a buzz just from the headphones just changing where their connection, that 1/8-inch connection goes.
Well, and that balanced cancellation approach, doesn't that kind of remind you of the way they do like noise cancellation? With some of these phones now where they have a microphone that is capturing the environment noise so it can cancel it out.
Absolutely. And it reminded me also of the way that with the Grateful Dead, they would at some points you'd see them singing and they would have 2 microphones, one right under the other, that they were singing. And basically what they were doing there is one is recording the voice as it's going directly into the microphone. The other one is recording everything that is being heard right there at that spot, so it can do the subtraction. And the only thing you're getting out then is the voice.
Yeah, and then
so it was a good usage of that as well.
They're running it through a filter.
Mm-hmm. So it was a good way of getting that, but similar idea. But again, in this case, you'll hear it when you get those kinds of unbalanced signals. So definitely good introduction there. Good way to break them apart, and good way to see that the cables are not that complicated. It's just wires going through, whether they're twisted or not, and whether they're shielded or not. Those are the main questions. And when it comes to connectors, like we did see that he mentioned the 1/4-inch TRS as well as the 1/4-inch TS. 1/4-inch TS are what you'll see normally for instrument cables, where there's just the tip and the sleeve. And a TRS is a stereo cable where you'll see that extra line in there is the main difference. But one passes the stereo signal and one passes the full signal. So it's a question of what you're trying to do. If you're doing an instrument cable, Mine are in the back
Well,
over there. But if you're doing an instrument cable,
balanced was the key to getting a quiet cable, right?
yeah. Well, plus the let's do this here with the this would be an instrument cable, so you just have the one line there. If this was a TRS cable, there would be another collar, essentially another black line on there, where this is just TS. So this is an instrument cable. So this would be a mono instrument cable. But this is what you, and this is we had somebody there mentioning Mogami cable. So shout out from Mogami.
Oh, they are popular.
Can't probably see it, but I keep two of those. I got them years ago. But one is straight at each end this way, and one of them is a 90-degree at one end. And then if I was going to get another one, I would get 90-degree at both ends, and that way I have each of those options available. I like having the 90s available, especially for when I go to an open jam like I did the other day.
Well, you don't want to keep if you know it's going to keep pushing and bending there at the connector, you don't want to keep doing that, because that tends to be where the point of failure happens.
Exactly. So that's one of those that, I keep an eye on that. And when I go to an open jam, for example, if I'm going to be standing in a spot where I'm near the amp, I don't want to use the straight part of the cable going into the amp, because I might bump into it and you do that. So use the 90, but some of them are not designed well, the amps, as far as if you can't get a 90-degree cable in there because there's knobs in the way, or, the input's up in this corner and there's other stuff in the way that makes it difficult to get it over there. But, it all depends on what you're looking at to see if that's what it is. But we have a second video from our friend here. The first one was about the cables.
Oh yeah, I couldn't eat
What
just
was the
one.
second video that he decided to line? He couldn't eat just one.
At this channel, I really couldn't eat just one. There is so many. He's gonna help me come up with topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
lots of good stuff.
The second one that we have is about gain staging, and it's another one that I get a lot of questions about, and should I or shouldn't I? And there is a lot of debate from different sides of audio engineering. And I think understanding it and knowing how it can help you is the key to determining whether you want to go all in and say, I have to do this. Because there's some people who insist that you should.
It's important to understand, if nothing else, because there's, there are things that you can fix in a mix. Like you've got something where something was recorded, but the levels were all wrong and it's super low. Well, there's ways you can fix that. And that's where being aware of how gain staging works and some of the easiest ways to get your signal boosted, whether it's doing upwards compression, whether it's doing a couple of different stages to get things going on. I mean, there are different ways of doing things, but it's good to be familiar with the different techniques so that you can try one. If it doesn't sound right that way, try a different technique, but there's multiple ways to get it.
And it's really become more relevant because nowadays you're mixing for this platform, you're mixing for that platform, you're mixing for CD release. Every one of those is a different stage.
Yep. Or the one that is best averaged across all of them based on how, how important it is to you, whether it sounds right in the car versus how important it is to sound right on the CD versus on this. Each of the venues through a phone, each of those different places people might be listening to it, you should be at least mindful of how it will sound there. And that's where it's helpful to listen to those different places, or at least understand how your stuff sounds different. Like, all the bass gets cut out when I go here, so it's going to sound totally empty in the bottom.
If you mix and target for the highest of standards, remixing or things that can't pick up all those dynamics will just have a more limited version of the mix. You're going to see more of this with Atmos and some of the things that are coming. There's going to be mixes where, like, if you have the right setup, you'll feel like it's surrounding you and around you. And if you're just playing with stereo headphones, it'll kind of feel like that, but not as much.
Yeah. Gain staging.
So
let's see what we got here.
This will help to explain what gain staging is.
Structure is one of the most important topics in audio, but I just don't think it gets the attention it deserves. A solid understanding of gain staging is absolutely essential from mixing music to optimizing the performance of a sound system. But if you're new to this channel, my name is Kyle. Welcome to Audio University. First of all, gain refers to the level difference between the input and output of a system. Proper gain structure means that the level of the signal is optimized throughout the entire signal chain. If the level of the signal isn't optimized at any particular stage of the signal chain, then the signal quality will be degraded. As audio technology has changed over the years, the way we approach gain structure has also changed. However, the goals have remained pretty much the same: to minimize noise and distortion while maximizing dynamic range and headroom. Let's take a look at how gain structure can help us to achieve these goals. I'm sure you've heard the effect of turning a sound system up beyond its limitations. As the signal starts to exceed the limitations of the circuitry, the signal begins to be distorted. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't always a bad thing. Muddy Waters and other guitarists of his time, they revolutionized the course of music with innovative guitar sounds that harnessed what some would call improper gain staging. However, while some types of distortion are pleasing, different types of systems distort audio signals in different ways. The consequences of overdriving an analog circuit or saturating analog tape are usually much more forgiving than the consequences of clipping a digital audio system. It isn't just the individual channels that you need to worry about either. You may have encountered a situation where none of the individual channels were clipping, but the meters on the master bus were solid red. It's best to leave some headroom in your mixing system so that the combined level of all of the inputs doesn't exceed the limitations of the master bus. Later on, I'll show you how to set up a mix to make sure that you get this right. But for right now, it's just important that you understand that you need to leave enough headroom when setting levels as to avoid overdrive and distortion. We also want to set up the gain of the system to minimize noise. The signal to noise ratio is the difference between the noise floor and the signal. Generally speaking, the quieter the noise floor can be in comparison to the signal, the better. Let's say you want to record the sound of your voice to a tape machine. Using the gain knob on your microphone preamp, you're able to control the level of the signal to be recorded. Turn the knob up and you'll get a louder recording. Turn the knob down, you'll get a quieter recording. To avoid overdriving the tape machine, you're careful not to turn the signal up too loud, but you should also consider what might happen if the signal is too quiet. The tape has a certain level of inherent noise of its own. The tape noise stays the same no matter how high or low you set the mic preamp. If you record a very weak signal to the tape, the signal to noise ratio will be very small. Plus, once your voice is recorded, you'll need to turn up the signal to bring it to a usable level. And when you boost the signal, you'll also be boosting the noise. If a strong signal is sent to the tape from the beginning, the signal to noise ratio will be much greater. And it's not just analog tape that has inherent noise. All devices will add some bit of noise to the signals passing through them. Each time you add a device to the signal chain, the signal will acquire a bit more noise. It might not seem like a substantial problem until you hear the combined noise floor of all of those devices stacked together. As the noise floor rises, the quietest signals will begin to be indistinguishable from the noise floor. This brings us to another big difference between analog and digital equipment. Well, you've got to be very careful not to record too weak a signal to analog tape or through an analog device. The noise floor of digital systems is much, much lower and therefore much more forgiving. When setting levels, you'll be searching for the sweet spot between too high, which might lead to overdrive or distortion, and too low, which might end up shrinking your signal to noise ratio. And like I said before, the approach is a bit different depending on if you're using analog or digital gear. With analog equipment, we tend to set levels a bit higher because noise is our biggest concern. Plus, if you slightly exceed the limitations of the equipment, it may even sound desirable. With digital systems, we tend to set the levels a bit lower because noise is a much, much smaller problem, and the consequences of overdriving a digital system into clipping will completely ruin your recording. You'll even see a difference between the types of meters used in analog versus digital systems. When setting levels in the analog realm, we'll usually aim for peaks around 0 dB VU on a VU meter, which is equal to plus 4 dBu. Plus 4 dBu is the professional standard for line level signals. Most digital systems use an entirely different scale for metering called full scale. When setting levels in a digital system with a full scale meter, the signal should never exceed 0 dB full scale or 0 dB FS. If a signal reaches 0 dB FS, it won't be properly quantized by the system, and you'll start to hear the sound of digital clipping. Opinions vary on this, but I like to set signals so that the peaks are at about -12 dB full scale, and the signal averages out about -18 dB full scale. This gives you a lot of headroom for the signal to breathe, while also paying attention to maximizing the signal-to-noise ratio. Throughout the signal chain, there are many places other than the microphone preamp that you can adjust the gain, so it's important to be aware of each stage of gain so that you can optimize the level of the signal throughout the entire signal chain. The first place that you can control the level of a signal is with the output volume adjustment of the audio source. So I like to start with smartphones, laptops, DJ turntables, outputting at about 80%. Outputting a healthy level like this means I won't have to increase the gain of the signal as much down the line. The second stage is usually the input preamp. Like I mentioned before, I like to set the preamp so that the input meter shows peaks at about -12 dB full scale in a digital system or 0 dB VU in an analog system. In your DAW software, you can sometimes adjust the gain of a region. This is a good place to set initial levels for your mix if you're mixing tracks that were sent to you at a level that is too high or too low. When using an equalizer, you're adjusting the gain of the signal. Boosting high frequencies with a high shelf will increase the overall level of the signal. Cutting low frequencies with a high-pass filter will decrease the overall level. You should also consider the effects of dynamics processing, like compressors, expanders, and duckers. These tools often have a makeup gain knob that allows you to increase the level to compensate for the gain reduction you've applied. Each auxiliary send knob, channel fader, bus master, and master fader is a place where you can influence the gain structure of the signal chain. In general, it's best to start with faders at unity so that signals pass through without being boosted or attenuated. Rather than using the master fader as your system output volume, it's best to keep the master fader at unity and adjust the loudness of the system with the monitor knob on your audio interface or the amplifier level control to find the appropriate level within the room. Let me show you the process I would use to make sure I'm setting up proper gain structure in a new session within a DAW. These steps might seem really simple, but trust me, this is probably where 90% of mixes go wrong. I want to set the initial level of the tracks so that they're at a workable level that still leaves some headroom in the master bus. In some DAWs, you can adjust the region gain directly, but if your DAW doesn't have this feature, you can simply drop a trim or gain plugin on each channel. I'm going to set the level of each track so that the meter on each input is at about -12 dB full scale. Notice that there's still plenty of headroom in the master bus with all of the track faders at unity. Taking the time to set up each mix like this will allow you to work more comfortably within the limitations of your mixing environment. So let me know in the comments, what is your process for setting up gain structure in a new mix? To learn how to make your next mix even better, watch the video that's on your screen now. I'll see you there.
Head's
Audio
growing
University.
bigger, Glenn.
Yes, it is. Barely fitting on your shoulders. I can see it. It's good stuff, right?
Oh, you know,
Gain
I
stage.
I love when I completely agree with everything that the instructor is saying. Like every suggestion, tip there, 100% agree with. Same approach
Not only
that.
that, but how many times do you see people breaking those rules? Or how many times do you glance at the meters on somebody's screen and you see like 4 or 12 of the channels just hard spiking red, like, and you're like, how are we listening to it at that stage? Like we definitely had like keep this part in mind, like just that few seconds of that clip right there, put that on your wall and like just like watch that every time if you're one of those people who have tracks clipping all the time, because you really need to get those all under control, because good signals in means that you can do so much more with them without having to do a lot of makeup gain afterwards that can add distortion, like you were saying. A distortion that you don't want, because distortion can be a good thing.
Yes. I like how he compared the analog versus digital scenario, because distortion clipping in analog world, at some points it was distortion in the old days. In the digital world, his suggestions there, especially towards the end, once in a while, like I'll have a channel that goes just a little above zero, usually drums. I can tame my drums down just enough to not hit 0.1 and get red. And sometimes I'll let it slide just because you don't hear it. It's not clipping. But your overall mix ends up getting hotter as well. And I think I'm going to try to stick to his targets there of -12 and -15 on the digital, and making sure that the headroom is always below zero, and see how that improves the overall mix.
Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. I mean, as soon as everything comes in so friendly, as we would say, like the signal is just all happy together. Everybody's working together. Nobody's killing the meters, because that other one, that one of the first points he mentioned, where the signals are each individual channel, everything looks well behaved, but then you look at the master and it's spiking, and you're like, why? Because everything looks well behaved, but there's positive reinforcement going on in certain regions that are reinforcing or causing hum in the room or what have you, that are getting you to a point where it's going too high in certain places. Whereas doing it like this, you're making sure that it's all good. You're making sure you're not spiking anywhere. And even doing the upward compression, like we talked about before, for my bass signal, I just put that BL1176 on there and just do a little bit of the makeup gain, or use the makeup gain to decide how loud to make the level. If I'm playing a very nuanced bass part where I'm doing a lot of very quiet stuff and some very loud stuff, a lot of dynamics in, dynamic range in the part, with that compressor, the dynamic range is still there, but the quiet parts come out front enough to be represented instead of being buried, and the loud parts do get shaved if they need to not be spiking out the top of the mix too.
Yeah, and again, his comparison between analog and digital there, compressors are so much more useful in the digital world. That's why you hear about them so much more. In the analog world, the signal to noise ratio he was talking about, like, and whether your analog signal, quiet analog signal in the old days was a bitch, because you're trying to bring up that sound that's not being recorded onto the tape, and the compressors back then would bring up the tape noise with the sound.
Yeah, and just when he started mentioning the more devices you put in there, you're bringing the noise floor from each in, and at each stage you're amplifying that noise floor if you're trying to bring sounds up. That is where the subtractive EQ, is that the one that we were using at the one point?
Oh yeah, for getting rid of the noise, the subtractive noise reduction.
Reaper, that's what it was.
Which is Reaper's free plugins, and the noise reducer, Reefer. Yes. We approve of the name.
We approve, because if you do have a situation,
best noise reduction.
If you do have a situation where you did get that, reinforced noise floor, where the noise floor got carried way up, and then you have a recording that would be great otherwise, but it was a noisy room or whatever, and noisy in the way where it's just a steady tone or a certain range of noise, because that will actually listen to the noise. You listen to a quiet part before you started playing, it hears that noise and it can subtract that out from the entire rest of the recording, and you don't get those kinds of ducks and clips that you might normally get with if you were trying to do it in a different way.
Not only has Reefer worked good for the general room noise situations, you get from phones and things, I've even used it to get rid of a little knock from a washing machine in a vocalist recording, where you could hear the washing machine like in the distance, and it had that little knock, and Reefer managed to get rid of it and still keep the vocal track sounding,
because it probably
natural.
saw it as such a narrow spike in there, because it was not a loud or a wide range sound. Like, it didn't cover a lot of the spectrum. It wasn't very low and very high. It was in a specific point, so they were able to just take that spike and just duck that out.
It was low enough in the gating process to just get rid of it without taking anything. Everything she's saying was above that.
Yeah, exactly. And even if it wasn't, there would probably be enough variation in her voice. There's enough above and below that even ducking out that one frequency, if it was right in the middle or wherever, would probably be fine. It would only be if it was right on her formant, like the most important. We looked at a video on formants the other week. The most important range of the voice right there for her voice, if it's like right here, and the washing machine was right there, and it tried to duck that part out, it might sound a little bit different. Like it might lower her voice down. It might add come a warble to it, but if it's not, as long as it's not right in that main the main formant, the deepest harmonic, that was the word I've been digging for there, the deepest harmonic of the voice there, the lowest frequency of the harmonic, the formant, getting in there would be a problem, and it could tuck it out a little bit, but it would probably still make it up fine, or there's enough of the voice around it or enough of the other harmonics in there that would add to the voice going around. Now I know that we have.
Speaking of harmonics,
yes.
Negative harmony, you said you knew about it. I'd never heard this term before.
Yep. Negative harmony. Let's see here. Yes, it was. I'd seen this video from Jacob Collier before. Like I saw something of his at one point, and it just. Sorry, George Collier. I got excited by the different stuff going on there, and seeing how when it comes to looking at music from different angles, like there's a lot of stuff going on there. He's got some crazy ideas.
Look at his videos. When your phone rings in a Jacob Collier concert.
Yeah, that's probably a good one too. Middle of playing something and like somebody copy somebody's ringtone just on the fly in the middle of your song.
So he's going to explain negative harmony.
Nice.
1 minute music theory.
Very cool.
Ever since Jacob Collier's interview by June Lee, musicians have been pretty obsessed with the concept of negative harmony. But it can be hard to understand exactly what it is. So here is negative harmony explained visually. When we play two or more notes, we create harmony. Different relationships between notes result in different emotions being created by different harmonies. Ernst Levy proposed that all chords have opposites in harmony and emotion. This can be described as harmonic polarity. We find the negative equivalent of a note or chord by reflecting it about the harmonic axis in the circle of fifths. The harmonic axis is found exactly halfway between the tonic and dominant in a key center. In the key of C, the harmonic axis lies between E flat and E, so a G would become a C and a B flat would become an A, for example. Using this method, we can find out the negative equivalent of whole chords. For instance, dominant 7th chord's negative counterpart is a 4 minor 6th. Here's a quick cheat sheet for the negative equivalent of common chords. If you just wanted to know how to work out a chord or progression's negative harmony equivalent, you could stop here. But if you want to understand how it works, then keep listening. Harmony, at its simplest, refers to tension and release. We go on a harmonic journey, and we arrive home. We can arrive home from two different directions, from the brighter side of the circle of fifths and the darker side of the circle of fifths. I'll let Jacob Collier describe his interpretation of this.
And you can even start being a plagal cadence from E, which is really weird, because instead of going E, A, D, G, C, you can go E. And it's something so elegant about that. Don't you think it's cool? Yeah, I think it's really cool. That's why I'm telling you about it. Because it's like the end of the road is bright, rather than the end of the road is fine.
By flipping a chord progression over the harmonic axis, we change the direction from which we approach the key center. A 2-5-1 is a staple of jazz music. It approaches the tonic from the brighter side of the circle of fifths. If we turn the major second and the dominant seventh chords into their negative equivalents, we approach the tonic from the darker side of the circle of fifths. One of the key aspects of negative harmony is that tension is preserved. A dominant seventh wants to resolve to the tonic. And so does its negative equivalent, a 4 minor sixth, with equal strength. But the emotions created by these two chords are opposites. A 5-1 cadence is triumphant, whereas a 4 minor sixth is timid, yet clearly wants to resolve to the tonic. Negative harmony is not an action. You can rarely flip every chord to its negative counterpart to create a contrasting emotional effect. Rather, negative harmony is a theory of harmonic direction, which can help us to consider how we can approach a key center in a more unfamiliar but equally powerful way. If you liked this video, please be sure to subscribe and let me know any suggestions you have for future videos in the comments below. I'll link the videos I showed in the description box, as well as recommended reading if you want to explore more on this topic.
That's very interesting.
Whoa.
That flip there, that another mind blower, right?
Dude, that was an epiphany moment. The way they displayed the circle of fifths and the contrasting relation on those three parts, and used that example, dun 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 dun.
Yep.
I understand that contrast.
Yeah, it's very, very good concepts that he went through there, and good way to go through them. And that whole flipping across the axis, that's very interesting. But I really loved the approaching the tonic. That's a very important thing. That was even even if most of that or a lot of that went over people's heads, the approaching the tonic from the right side of the circle or the left side, that makes a big difference. Like you can hear that, and the way that they are similarly resolving to the tonic as far as the way that it resolves there, but they get there in very different ways. It sounds different. The journey to get there is different. So an interesting way that you could change up a chord progression or a song, put a little twist in there by doing a flip like that. That'd be very interesting.
Now that was from George Collier, but Jacob was the one playing, which I'm guessing they must know each other because on his page, his phone accidentally rang on Jacob's concert.
Yeah, there you go. I think that would be something like where, if you had your ringtone as a musical ringtone and he's sitting there playing a piece in a concert and he hears that ringtone go off, he would probably just incorporate that ringtone and do like an answer back to that melody line that he just heard, and the crowd would love it, I'm sure. That's the kind of thing you can hear it and you know exactly what the note is, and you just jump it right into the middle of the song that you're doing and just go right back into your song without missing a beat there. That's what
and I do want to check out some of that Jacob playing because he's got some skills.
Absolutely, lots of skills. And just as far as I'm not going to say way out there ideas on harmony, but as far as his mind can go to places that are way out there when it comes to harmony and do some crazy stuff there. Not your average 1-4-5 songs and things like that. A lot of other things that he can throw at you. In a way, it reminds me of my cousin Jeff just doing some crazy changes and crazy things in there where he can just throw these substitutions in that you wouldn't expect, but they sound really beautiful and really cool. And you it takes a while to kind of get into the rabbit hole of why they sound good, but he's definitely been down that rabbit hole. Jacob has, for sure.
Oh, I think he's a savant. The way he's playing those chords, just freely.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of practice time there as well. And then we have MIDI controllers, right?
Yeah, this is Tetro, another one that was we checked out, I think, a few weeks ago, 3 maybe. And another fucking MIDI gearhead that has put together, I think, the most compact looping station with a lot of functionality. I mean, Joe, Slither Joe, he's got a couple of different looping stations with the, he wants to set up a stage and roll it out on the beach.
Nice.
When you're talking minimalist setup, you can go little table in a corner and become a DJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some good options there for sure.
And this is from at Tatro, pretty sure. Yep. At YouTube.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
And he's another one of those YouTubers, you get a combination of killer tips, reviews, and performance videos. This is how we all should be doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Good mix of stuff.
Oh, he might be in the cloud stuff, huh?
Ah.
Nope, here it is.
For me, this is the perfect MIDI controller setup for performing in Ableton Live. I can super easily go from playing synths to playing drums to triggering effects sounds, sample my own live vocal, record and launch loops, and do cool performance effects. It's a lot of fun, and I'm going to break down this setup for you, but also talk through how you can create your own MIDI controller live performance setup, whether you have the same exact gear as me, or whether you have some other MIDI controllers laying around that can do similar things. Definitely recommend you watch the full performance with this setup before checking out this tutorial. It's linked in the description. Today's video is going to be brought to you by Skillshare, but we'll talk about that later. For now, let me explain this setup. Okay, so one very important aspect of this setup in Ableton Live is that arming tracks, the act of arming a track so that I can play it with my keyboard. Usually by default, this is set to exclusive so that when you go to arm another track, it disarms the previously armed track. But you'll see as I arm tracks here in Ableton Live, all the other tracks are remaining armed, which means when I play this keyboard, we're going to hear a bunch of different sounds at the same time, which sounds pretty cool, but isn't always what we want. So the reason for this is, well, you all saw my little controller here with the effects. That is armed 100% of the time during the performance. That is so that at any point I can trigger these cool effects, add sounds to my transitions, just add cool moments throughout the performance at any time. That track is always armed, which means arming the track cannot be exclusive, or else that would get unarmed every time I armed a new track. So just note that. You can right click on any arm button and turn arm exclusivity off if you want to do this method. Now let's talk about that effects kit for a second. It's very simply just a drum rack containing a bunch of different cool one-shot sounds. Some of them are in key with the song, which is why you see this D major label on the track. You will also notice that there are no stop or start buttons in this FX track. That's because I'm not recording or triggering any loops for this FX track. It is simply just for me to reach over and play effects. Now this controller here is a controller I backed on Kickstarter, but unfortunately they no longer make it. It's called Off Grid by Bird Kids. It's just a really cool small controller. It even has Bluetooth capabilities. I've done a whole video on it. But if you want to do something similar, really all you need is a pad controller, something that you can simply assign to a drum rack. Now, being that this is armed the entire time during the performance, why then, when I play the pads here, or when I play the keys here, why am I not triggering this? This is an important concept for anybody setting up a live performance with MIDI controllers. This track here, as well as other tracks in the project, is set to exclusively receive MIDI from the off-grid, meaning the only thing that can trigger this effects track is this controller. Any buttons I push on the launch key or the APC Mini will not trigger this track. I think that's pretty straightforward. You're going to notice me reaching over a lot to the APC Mini. This is a controller by Akai for controlling Ableton Live sets. you're going to see me use this controller to arm tracks. That's what this bottom row of buttons down here is doing. I've hit Shift record arm, which means all of these buttons will do record arm. You can also set these to clip, stop, solo, mute, etc., depending on what you want. Additionally, on the APC Mini, you probably saw me adjust the faders. These faders are simply controlling the volumes for each track in my project. There's one moment where I fade in the top percussion, and at the beginning of the performance, I'm actually fading the volume in. That's just during the intro. That's useful for making any mix adjustments during your performance. Finally, I get to give you all a little painting update. I am a full-time creative freelancer, and basically all of the things you see me do, all of the skills that I've acquired have been largely self-taught. If that's something you're looking to pursue, Skillshare has classes for those of you that want to make that leap, like this one, Creating Your Dream Career, Uncover and Apply Your Creative Strengths. It can be hard to even know where to start in pursuing a creative career, but this class is going to help you clarify that vision and even create a plan. When I started creating my new ambient album, I wanted to create all of the artwork for it. There's a cool class for that as well. Sketchbook illustration for all. Draw your day with watercolor and pen. Here's a couple paintings from my latest trip to Korea, and here's what that final artwork looked like for the ambient album. And I wanted to take this one step further and learn a little bit about how to animate these drawings with my iPad. And Skillshare, of course, has a class for that as well. And these became promotional materials for my album, and it really helps my stuff stand out. And it also helps me be independent as a creative. And right now, the first 1,000 of my subscribers who click the link down in the description can get a free 30-day trial of Skillshare. It's totally free for those 30 days, and see how far you can take your skills, whether you're looking to build a creative career or just sharpen more creative skills. Let me know what you think of the paintings and the art in the description. Use the link in the description to get the free trial. And remember, supporting the sponsor means supporting the channel. Get back to the tutorial. We, of course, use this grid to launch existing clips. Those are all these already illuminated pads, or if a track is armed, we can record into any of these red pads. So say the project was playing, three, four, I can record a new drum clip, 3, 4. And then right there, I can just loop a new clip. That goes for any of the synths, any of the drums, and even the vocal sampling. Of course, the APC Mini also allows me to launch entire rows or scenes of clips. So when it comes time to do the big drop of the performance, I can launch an entire scene. So we've used nearly every aspect of every controller besides, so far, I didn't talk about what I do with these knobs, and a couple of these pads are mapped a special way. These are actually my performance effects. The two pads right here are beat repeats. I press them once to activate them and press them again to deactivate them. The knobs on the top here are various other performance effects, like specifically for the vocal, I can filter the vocal out. I can also specifically filter the entire track. Low pass, in addition to high pass. This is a very effective performance effect. I've got one other funky beat repeat here for adding more random stutters. And this knob here does something interesting. Let me actually just play the piano part. I'm going to stop all clips, which is another function that is great on the APC Mini. I can stop everything from here. Let me play just the piano. Nothing so remarkable here, it's a piano. But as that loop is playing, at one turn of a knob, that same track, that same loop, becomes a kalimba. One cool thing I'm going to be experimenting more with, but I really don't like Ableton's implementation of it, is the ability to use chains to go from having a track be one instrument, like piano, and then being able to change that to a completely different instrument using a knob. That's done via the chain selector of Ableton Live's instrument rack. The reason I say I don't like the implementation of this is because this should be a fully fledged feature. And the reason I don't think that it properly is because it's hidden in these little tiny icon menus. And actually setting it up is not that intuitive and doesn't make sense. Every other keyboard that you've ever purchased that had preset sounds on it just comes with a bank of sounds, and you just scroll through that bank of sounds, right? I don't know why Ableton can't create something similar like that for their instrument rack that does exactly what we're doing here, but isn't displayed in this way that is not intuitive at all, this chain selector. Essentially, this knob, what it does is it changes that little blue marker. It goes from 0 to 8. If I'm on 0 through 8, I'm on the piano. As soon as I cross that threshold to 9, I'm on the kalimba. You could essentially set up a bunch more instruments in there too. But then the reason I wouldn't want to really go for more than 2 is because if you're using a knob to map that and control that, you have to like divide your knob space into like quadrants and be very precise about where it lands. I don't think that's ideal for a performance setup. I should instead be able to simply like map a few pads or something and say, okay, piano, kalimba, synth lead, and just easily snap between those. But it's not super easily done in Ableton Live. Again, it's called Ableton Live. But for now, the chain selector works fine. I just hope in the future they will redesign this and actually come up with a preset function. And no, I don't mean what they added with the snapshots. That can't even be mapped, which I think is an insane choice, or just insane in general. Hopefully you understand that you don't need this exact gear to pull all of this off. You can swap in and out different types of gear to fit this type of setup, but the core elements here are a dedicated controller for effects and transition sounds. This thing will always be armed during your project. A controller that you can navigate around your project, control your mix, and record and launch loops. I think that's super useful. You can do this with something like a launch pad. You can do this with a combination of a launch pad and another knob or fader controller. And then the keyboard instrument, essentially we're just using the pads, we're custom mapping the knobs, and of course we're playing the keys. So as long as you have a keyboard instrument that can do those things, great. Maybe you prefer to have a longer keyboard or a larger keyboard, that works too. If it has knobs, pads, and keys, you can accomplish all of what we're doing here with your controller as well. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that look into this setup and it gave you some insight or inspiration to set up your own live electronic music setup with MIDI controllers for Ableton Live. If you got lost in any of that, I want to remind you that I have a whole entire Ableton Live for Beginners series where you can learn the foundations of Ableton Live. And also you should check out our sponsor Skillshare because they've got a lot of great courses over there. Don't forget, first 1,000, use the link in the description, get access to the free trial. If you support the sponsor, support the channel, and it's free, so go do it. That's going to be it. Thank you to all my members for supporting this channel. I really appreciate you all. I will see you next time. This has been Tatro. Have a good one.
At Tatro on YouTube.
Nice. Very cool. So many things you can do with those.
Well, I could really relate with his conundrum with the patch changing. Like he's playing a MIDI loop and he just wants it to change to different instruments after so many progressions. And it should be something simple. And in a lot of cases, it can be. The Ableton APC configuration he would have had to remap it, and switching patches, it's the same problem a guitarist has when they've got like 5 pedals in front of them and I want to go into distortion. Give me some chorus, or switch to a preset.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of options with those controllers like that. I also, with Ableton, the fact that he is somebody who has Ableton tutorials or videos explaining some things there. Good to know about that. There's a lot of different places, like we talk about Creative Sauce, and we talk about going into things there on Cakewalk. Having different resources that you can go to see how to use the different interfaces is a good place to start. Whether you've got your heart set on an interface or not, because seeing how things work in different interfaces make things jump out at you more. When you do jump into an interface, things will just be more intuitive because you see, oh, this is kind of like how they did it over there, or this is kind of like how they did it over there.
And
in the different ways.
He made it a point to, tell Ableton, it's called Ableton Live. And his problem there was if he's playing live and he has to go drill down into a equipment menu to switch the patch, you can't do that on the fly. And he's trying to build
You can buy a second one and have it over there and have it already set up.
Yeah. What he needs to do is use MIDI control signals to make the patch changes. There is a way to do it, and I am positive he already has his workaround, but he's reviewing these solutions and this approach and letting the manufacturers know, like, it'd be great if you include this into your software.
Yeah, exactly. But again, with the amount of buttons that he already has, it's amazing that he can keep track of where everything is on all that in the first place.
Well, with the loopers and the DJs, they have that. They can look at like 32 buttons and every one of them in their brain, they know.
And you saw how easy some of the stuff that he did was, like, as far as, it sounds like something complex is going on, but he's literally, he's got this whole row that he can just go boom, and like, that whole row kicks in, and then, add, this, and you can just like, as you're hitting stuff and just add things a little bit here and there spice wise, or changing entire themes anytime in the song by going to entire, just at the hit of any button, because so much is available at that point. The buttons I have over here are just things, I got some of those buttons, but
well, and he had some buttons designed for doing the drums. He had ones for the special effects, the pieces that he chose to put together to say, like, this is, on the road looping station.
Exactly. Keeping it compact and keeping it mobile. That was a good way to do that, because that is important. If you're going to be performing somewhere, you don't want to have to bring tons of gear, weighing hundreds of pounds to get stuff done.
All of that took the same amount of space as a laptop. So,
or a pedal board.
So you consider a laptop with that. That's a very small amount of space.
Yep. Not bad.
That's
a lot of options.
That's an apartment toy.
Apartment jam, yeah. And I can't believe time got away from us like that, but we're already past pumpkin hour.
Oh, it flies.
It does fly. We had more that we didn't get to tonight, but guess what? There's another Thursday.
We have archives.
We have archives, and there's a Thursday coming up, and we'll do more of what we missed today next week on Talking IT with Glenn and Tony. See you guys next week.
Night, everyone.
Have a good one. Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some BandLab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like, stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ended right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.